All right, we are back. Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. Y'all can see our names right there. And we're back to talk about Notre Dame football. And so we kind of put the finishing touches last night on the Stanford game. And so what we're going to do now, as I told you, we're not going to be talking about UNLV all week. We will have a show about the UNLV matchup. We are going to respect UNLV that way. This is a team with a winning record. I think that their football coach is doing some nice things, because when he took over and came there, I believe he came from Oregon, correct?
Arroyo, yeah.
Yes, Coach Marcus Arroyo. When he came there from Oregon, I mean, he walked into a pretty rough situation, and they were bad. And they're a competitive, even though some of the losses, they're a competitive football team. He's doing a really nice job there. So us not talking about UNLV is not meant as a disrespect to UNLV. If you can lose to Marshall and Stanford, you can lose to UNLV. The point is, our focus this week is going to be about what we have always said about Notre Dame, is it's not really about the opponent. It's about Notre Dame. And this is especially true in 2022. So over the next couple of days, we're going to talk about just some things that we believe are not so much wrong with Notre Dame, but it'll be kind of part of it, but it's more so wrong within the framework of what needs to be done. And what I hate, Ryan, is when people just rant and complain and say, this sucks, that's wrong, I hate this, that sucks, this is terrible. And they say, well, what should be done about it? Well, oh no, that's what the coaches get paid to do. Well, our channel's different, and that's why it's called Irish Breakdown, is because we are not afraid to offer our opinions. And also we feel it's good policy, right? If you're gonna step out and say you're doing it wrong, then you better have some sort of answer for, okay, then Ryan, what is right? And so that's what we're going to do the next couple of days. And of course, we're going to start with the Notre Dame offense, because there are things to fix about the defense. Trust me. But the reality is your defense has at least played well enough to give you a chance to win all 6 games that you've played so far. The same cannot be said for the Notre Dame offense. And that is why the offense is going to be the topic of our conversation today, because there are changes that need to be made. And look, a lot of people say, oh, you need to fire this coach and fire that person and do this and do that. And the reality is that's not realistic. That's not something we're going to really discuss today, because we don't advocate for people to be fired at Irish Breakdown unless there's some sort of moral thing. We could get into some of that stuff later. That's not really the focus of what we're talking about. What we're talking about are things that can be done now, not in the off season. Make this change, go to the portal, go to this, go to that. Ryan, there are things that Notre Dame could do now. And honestly, it begins with personnel. And I'll make this statement and then let you run with it if you want to.
Sure.
I have not seen an offensive coordinator more misuse and abuse the personnel he has than blame that personnel, which is what I think is happening from things I've heard sources that have talked to it. When you see comments being made by alums who happen to have played with Tommy Rees, that are making comments about the lack of talent, I've never seen just at every position except the line misuse the talent more than what I've seen. And so whenever you're talking about changes, it has to start with how the personnel is being used.
I mean, you have to look yourself in the mirror when it starts with, right? I mean, that's what coaches are paid to do. What am I doing wrong to not put my team in the best possible position to be successful? And I think, Brian, the biggest indicator to what you're saying, and I 100% agree with it, I do, we've talked about this a ton, is that Tobias Merriweather played, 4 snaps, got targeted twice, and had a 41-yard touchdown during the game, right? I mean, you can't tell me that you're putting your best product on the field if that's the results you get out of such a small volume of opportunities for a single player. So I think from a playing certain players enough perspective, we're not seeing it. I think from a schematic approach to how best utilize players, we're also not seeing it. There's a lot of things that we can kind of work through in this podcast. I know we're going to, but there needs to be a different approach to not only who's on the field, but how you utilize players.
Right.
Like there's some players, like Brian, I'm looking at some players, I'm just like, that guy that's not the role he needs to play.
No.
Like, that's not best for them. That's not
that
best.
Happens a lot, Ryan. It's happening a lot. It's happening a lot. It's so easy to look at the personnel on the field and say, well, pretty much know what's coming right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yes, Ryan, I mean, you can say, okay, like, here's my thing. I've always felt this way, Ryan. don't talk to me about what the school's not doing for Notre Dame or admissions is not doing for Notre Dame or whatever the case may be until you are doing everything possible on your end to make sure that you're getting the most out of the resources you have. Once you
Right.
do that, then come talk to me about, hey, we're doing it. We're doing everything we can. We need more. Same thing here. Don't talk to me about the talent and all this when you've been on staff for 6 years and you've been the offensive coordinator for 3 years, because the quarterback room is 1,000% on you. The offensive recruiting has been 1,000% on you as the leader of this offensive football team. So don't talk to me about talent when you're the one that's been responsible for that. And then number two, don't talk to me about talent when you're not using the talent you have. Now, you say, hey, look, use Braden Lindsey the way and Chris Tyree the way, the two whipping boys for fans, right? If you're using them correctly and they're not making plays, fine. We'll say it. They're not good. They can't play. But when you're not using them correctly and you're not using some guys at all, again, Tobias Merriweather played 4 snaps against in the first 4 games. I think he played a couple more snaps against BYU. Came in. There was like a couple run plays he was in. He wasn't used a lot, but at least he got a little bit more, opportunity, I guess. Played 3 snaps against BYU. So comes into this game having played 7 snaps in 5 games. Goes out and runs the most beautiful post route you've seen all season. Looked like Avery Davis last year or 2 years ago against Clemson, right? Remember when Avery Davis was a senior at the time. And then comes out earlier in the game, beats a guy, just runs by a guy, should have been open for another touchdown. You're telling me that just went on during a week of practice last week? Or was he always capable of this and you wasted him for reasons still to not be known,
Yep.
and you're, look at when Chris Tyree and Diggs and Estime were being used together as a trio in the run pass game against Cal and North Carolina, and it looks brilliant. And then the last 2 games, it's the most boring usage of running backs ever. And you're using Chris Tyree in a certain way. So let's kind of dive into that, Ryan, and we'll get into the personnel. Let's do the specifics now. So we're not just ranting for 20 minutes. I want to get into the specific things that we are saying is wrong. Number one, the biggest personnel issue I see right now is a failure to recognize and appreciate who your quarterback is and then build around him. What we are seeing Tommy Rees doing right now is, this is what I want to run, and this is what I'm going to call. And if it doesn't work, then it's Drew Pine's fault or Chris Tyree's fault or Matt Salerno's fault or Braden Lindsey's fault or whoever else's fault, not mine. And the reality is the game plan called on Saturday was not a game plan that should have been run for Drew Pine in his 4th start of his career. And a year from now, fine, run that offense with Drew Pine. But it's not one that should have been used for Drew Pine in with where he is right now. And so, number one, the first thing you have to do is, this is our quarterback. And here's the thing: say, well, it doesn't have to be. What if you want to put in Steve Angeli? Same principle. You have a young quarterback that doesn't have a rocket arm and isn't a guy that's going to beat teams with his legs. The margin for error for him is a little smaller than it is for a lot of teams' top quarterbacks, okay? So then what you need to do is you need to then kind of counter that by increasing the margin for error by using your personnel correctly. And there are 2 players at wide receiver that need to start playing more. And I would argue this. I'll even go on a limb and say, if one of these 2 players isn't on the field on almost every play, then you're doing this coaching thing wrong, with few exceptions based on some looks and some schemes you want to do. And that is Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colzie. They're 2 very different players, but the one thing they both have in common, they're big. And when you have a quarterback who is young, inexperienced, lacks confidence, when does Drew Pine look confident? I've seen him look confident throwing to 2 guys, Michael Mayer and Tobias Merriweather. Why? Bigger guys, right? And you listen, and you got to listen to Coach Freeman after the game talking about, well, he's doing this, he's doing that, and all this other kind of stuff, and he's got to get better here. And then you listen to Drew Pine talk about Tobias Merriweather, and he's like, dude, he does that all the time. And that's what we've heard. I mean, Drew Pine confirmed what we've been saying all year, what we've heard from our sources all year. Dude does this all the time in practice. I loved it when he said that. It was like so beautiful. And so clearly he's confident there. But put Deion Colzie in the game. Why? Because Deion doesn't have to get open. He's 6'5". Do what Stanford does.
He's always open.
He's always open. And when you have a 6-foot quarterback that's struggling with confidence right now, throwing the ball outside the hashes, you need that. And so to me, I'm not saying you got to put both of those guys on the field because you still need to play Jaden Thomas. You still need to play Braden Lindsey. You still need to play Lorenzo Styles. There is still a role for Matt Salerno, albeit a limited one. There's still a role for Joe Wilkins. So it's not like just put those two kids out there for every single play. But one of them needs to be on the field at all times, and there need to be some snaps where they're both on the field together because you have to be able to take advantage of that size, Ryan. With the way this team is built, you want to be a running football team. You've got a quarterback that's not a runner. You've got a quarterback that's inexperienced, doesn't have a bazooka. His ball placement was good against BYU, but isn't always on point. You need to protect your run game and protect your quarterback by making sure you have more size on the field, and those are the only two guys that bring that to you.
Well, and I don't want to, we're not pushing back on, this is no detriment to Drew Pine, right? Like, I'm not saying anything that is a negative thing about him. It's just simply the fact of, like you said, doesn't have the strongest arm, and his ball place is hit and miss at times, right? Like, he's a young quarterback that's still developing. So when you have that type of player that has those inconsistencies and doesn't have maybe that high margin for error, how do you increase them more? Yes, or experience. How do you increase a margin for error? You put length around him, right? Those guys all have incredible catch radiuses. I mean, we didn't even talk about Eli Raritan because I know we're going to talk about the tight end position a little more in depthly. Yeah, we're going to talk about that more in depthly. But if we start getting some of these size around it, Drew Pine, it's going to make him more confident because he's not going to have to worry about being perfect all the time, right? Like, that's the thing, is you don't have to be perfect, Drew. You just need to put it in the vicinity of a guy like a Tobias Merriweather, and he can make a play on it. They just have to put it around Michael Mayer. He can make a play on it. Same thing for a Deion Colsey. Same thing for an Eli Raritan when we get there. Like, those guys create opportunity for your player, because the biggest misnomer is that the only way to create separation is either with speed or route running. That's not true. You can also create separation with length in the air, elevation. Like, that is also a way of creating a point of separation for a wide receiver. So those are the biggest things for me, Brian. Like, we keep harping on the Tobias Merriweather, but like, after you saw the game, does anybody blame us for doing that? Right? I mean, literally.
Thank you. You only see it now, right? You see it now.
The only catchable ball that was thrown to Tobias Merriweather was a 41-yard touchdown. And the other one should have been a 30-yard touchdown on the first one? Like, it should have had 2 catches for 70-plus yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. On 2 targets. That's what should have happened.
He ran by dudes both times. And what is this team lacking? The ability to run, supposedly the ability to run by people, which, again, is a misnomer. If anyone that's been in a game knows that that's just flat out not true.
Right.
But it's clear that the game plan is not designed to take those shots, right? And they did in this game. My question is okay, first of all, why'd you wait till the fourth quarter to do that? But, whatever. That's a different conversation. Second half, I should say, because they did take the one shot in the third quarter. Yeah. But this is something that's going to help your quarterback. What is something else that can help your quarterback? And that is getting more playmakers on the field and using those playmakers correctly. And we'll get into this a little bit more in the run game, but the way that Chris Tyree has been used in the last 2 games is, I'm going to say it. This is going to sound unprofessional, but I've really tried to think of a better way to say it. It's the dumbest thing I've seen. It is the dumbest thing I have seen in a long time. The fact that I can't tell you the last time, I think it's probably North Carolina, the last time that Chris Tyree was giving anything but an A or a B gap run. I mean, you're having him just run duo nonstop. That's not his game. Now, he ran well on Saturday. You go back and watch the film. He didn't have a lot of holes. He was kind of leaking out. He had that 1 15-yard run called back because of a holding penalty. You're asking him to do things you should be asking Audric Estime to do, and you're not giving him the opportunity to make plays in space. You have these great game plans. The first 2 wins with the running backs in the pass game, and it's completely gone. So you're not getting him on the field enough. You're not utilizing the playmakers you have, which is tight end, which is Eli Raritan, Holden Stace, and Mitchell Evans. And the issue that we had with Mitchell Evans last week was, wait a minute, you're telling Deion Colsey and Kane Barong that they're not playing because they missed fall camp, and then Mitchell Evans comes back, who hasn't practiced since – he's been out forever. I think he missed all spring and all fall camp, and now he's finally back, and you immediately put him in there. I'm not knocking Mitchell, but like, what is the message you send to the rest of the team? Number one, and then number two, if you're going to put him in there, you've got to utilize him. And so now there was one pass play that was called where Mitchell should have caught a corner route. If you remember that play out of the 12 personnel with the two tight ends together, but you got to use them more. You've got to use Eli Raridan more. And it's like, yes, I get it. He can block, but he's also your twitchiest kid you have a tight end. Why are you not lining him up outside? Why are you not putting him in the slot? You know, they're using Holden Stace a little bit, and then when he disappears against Stanford, gets one target and he plays, I mean, just a couple plays, and then it's like, okay, you know, where'd Holden Stace go all of a sudden? You know,
because you could have built off of what he did against BYU
right,
and gained more confidence, and you just said like,
played
nope,
2 snaps.
We're done.
Played 2 snaps against Stanford. Mitchell Evans comes back after not having played all year, plays 19 snaps. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like, I don't quite understand what you're doing at this point in time. You're not there was a snap where there was like, you had Matt Salerno and I think Davis Sherwood or one of the other tight ends. And you're like, well, there's only 3 guys that the defense has to worry about right now. Just from a usage standpoint, not even from is that guy good standpoint, but a usage standpoint. People say, well, you can't win a receiver if you're playing Matt Salerno. Okay, let's stop playing Matt Salerno. I mean, you have other options.
Yep.
And so if you're going to insist on running a bunch of 12 personnel, then you have to use it better. And that's the thing we're not seeing enough. And so that's an aspect of what we're doing. And then when it comes to personnel, you've got to figure something out with Lorenzo Styles. I'm going to try to be delicate about this because I'm very high on Lorenzo Styles, and I know you're extremely high on Lorenzo as a player.
Yep.
There's a usage problem with him, but it's not the only problem. Lorenzo is not playing inspired football right now. Now, it may be the usage problem has him bummed out. He's still a young kid. He may be frustrated. He may be homesick. I don't know what it is, but one of the complaints I've had all season with Lorenzo is the kid's just not playing hard, not consistently playing hard. And it was better against them, but I think you need to come and have a sit-down conversation with him and say, hey, man, what's going on? Figure it out, fix it, and then start using him better because he's being incredibly misused this season. We've talked about Braden Lindsey. You've got to use him better. We'll get into some of the specifics of those 2 kids when we get to the pass game, but the reality is there are playmakers on this football team that you are not using. There were times on Saturday, at least 10 to 12 snaps, where you chose to put an overall slow group of players in the field. Now, they're good players. Logan Diggs is a good football player. Mitchell Evans is a good football player. But Jaden Thomas is a good football player. But they're not fast. They're not good because they're fast. And all of them have a good role. But when they're all on the field together, you all of a sudden just became as slow as Stanford.
That's when you become the misnomer that everyone says with Notre Dame, that there is no speed on Notre Dame's roster when you choose to be that way, right? Like that's self-inflicted. Like that is what it is. I mean, if we're being honest, like that is a coaching self-infliction right there. You are putting a cap on how explosive and how effective you can be as a football team if you do not put your best assets on the most talented players that you have mixture onto the field. You are limiting the impact that you can have. That's what's happening, man. And like Brian, I keep coming back to this, man. And like, it's just, look, there are things that you could do right now because I agree about Lorenzo, right? I don't know what's going on in his mind, but there's something there, right? And as a coach, you need to figure that out. What's going on there, right? Figure that out. And then after that, it's your responsibility to get him back on track, right? Because he's still a young pup, man. Like some guys don't have all those answers by themselves. You are there to guide men, right? Guide young men. Right. And as a coach,
and build
you need to sit
young men.
And build. Yes, and build. Exactly. And in this situation, whether that is doing more RPO and getting Lorenzo Styles some easy routes, some arrow routes, some screens, whatever it is, get him involved early on. I don't know what it is, but the point is that something needs to give here, man, because right now, Lorenzo Styles should be your best receiver on this roster right now. And long term, I think we both agree Tobias Merriweather has the most talent of anybody that's on the roster right now. But this year, Lorenzo Styles should be your dude. And right now, he's not playing like your dude. He's not.
Yep.
And you're not utilizing him right. He's in his own head. There's a lot of things wrong in that situation. But regardless, there is a coaching failure that's happening right now. Is it all coaching? No, it's not all coaching, but the coaching is a major issue. We have to be honest about that. Have to be honest about it.
So, Ryan, personnel is one thing. You've got it. Use it correctly. And if you're not using your personnel correctly, then don't talk to me about how you don't have the talent. Now, you have the talent. Oh, well, it's young. I don't care. Clemson won a national title with a true freshman quarterback, a true sophomore running back. Leading receiver was a true sophomore. Second leading receiver was a true freshman, right? And then who was your next guy? Hunter Renfro, right? That was your only veteran on that offensive staff. No, okay. Hey, well, those guys were fine. Okay, whatever. We're talking about Stanford and Marshall, right?
Yep.
Okay, we're not talking about beating Alabama. We're talking about beating Marshall and Stanford and UNLV and Syracuse, right? And you have the talent to do it. Well, these guys aren't that good. Okay, well then who was responsible for recruiting these guys? Deion Colsey was a top 100 receiver. Tobias Merriweather's a top 100 receiver. Lorenzo Styles is a top 100 receiver. Braden Lindsey was a 4-star. Jaden Thomas was a 4-star. Maya Kamara was a top 100 player, 5-star. Eli Raridan was a top 100 player. Holden Stace was a top 200 player. Chris Tyree was a top 100 player. Audric Estime was a top 200 player. Drew Pine was a top 200 player. So either you have terrible evaluation skills across the board.
Yeah.
And everybody else missed on these kids, including us, who graded out all those kids high. And I had Logan Diggs graded out higher than everybody else as well, right? Either you missed on all those guys or you're not using them correctly. All of them. So it's actually worse for Tommy Rees to say they don't have talent because of how long he's been here to say, well, who recruited all these kids?
Right.
You guys made Deion and Lorenzo priorities. They were not guys you picked up after missing on other targets. Chris Tyree was not a guy you picked up after missing out on other top targets. Neither was Eli Raridan. Neither was Holden Stace. Neither was Drew Pine. Like, I could understand people complaining about Drew Pine, and it's not Tommy Rees's fault if they tried to get other quarterbacks and they settled on Drew, after. He committed to them as a sophomore. A sophomore. You wanted Drew Pine. So then don't come bitching to me, theoretically, publicly or privately to your friends or whatever, that you don't have the kind of quarterbacks you need because you chose this quarterback room. You chose it. You chose it. Yep. You recruited it. So who's responsible for that? This isn't like Marcus Freeman walking in as the first-year defensive coordinator last year saying, hey, these are the guys I got. I got to coach up what I have. Right? This is not that. You've been part of the staff for 6 years. 6 years. 3 as offensive coordinator. You guys pushed out Chip Long to insert this in there. Right? So, I'm tired of. I mean, Chip Long walks into a situation in 2017, and he inherits a team that went 4-8 the year before. Lost their quarterback. Has a quarterback that can barely complete a pass down the field, and look what they built that year. Right? With none of the dudes he recruited. Right? Beat Georgia with a receiving corps that had an uninspired Equanimity St. Brown. Freddie Canteen, Cam Smith, and Chris Fink was your receiving corps against Georgia, and you almost beat Georgia, who went on to be the national runners-up. But you can't have a lead but for 2 minutes against Stanford. You can't beat Marshall because you don't have talent at wide receiver. Spare me. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the excuses. And I thought that was gone when Kelly left. But where are the excuses being made right now? Who's the holdover? Who groomed him? Who taught him? That's where we are. So stop talking to me about not having the talent. I'm sick of saying that not having it. You want to say they don't have the talent, be Clemson? Oh, we can have that conversation. We may agree to disagree. We're talking about Stanford. Ryan, in the last calendar year, Stanford has gone 2-11. Their wins are over Colgate and Notre Dame. Shut up if talent is your comment right now, because that's what we're talking about right now. I don't want to hear it. Want to hear it. Okay? So, it's not talent, right? It's about how you use the talent. Let's talk specifically run game and pass game, right? Those are sort of overarching. Actually, you know what? We forgot to do something here real quick before we get into run game and pass game.
Oh, I know.
We talked personnel. Now we're going to get in specific operation of how the game is going to go. First change that needs to be happening. This needs to be Marcus Freeman going into the office and saying, this stuff, you're done with it. The scan offense, gone.
Yeah.
Here's why it needs to go, Ryan. Let's get to some specifics of it, right? I'll let you kind of start off with it. Then I'll give mine if there's something that you leave out. But let's explain why this is a bad idea with any team to do every single play, but why it's an especially bad idea against Notre Dame. And there was a play on Saturday that was indicative of why this is so broken. Did you see the snap on the final drive where it took so long? They're holding there. Drew Pine just standing there.
Yep.
And they didn't snap the ball. So then all of a sudden, Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles both look at the sideline as the ball's being snapped with less than 2 minutes to go in the game. You got two receivers staring at the sideline because they're thinking the ball's not being snapped. We must be getting a new play. And they look over, the ball snapped, and Drew Pine is rolling out, and they're standing there looking at the sidelines. That's coaching.
Brian,
coaching.
Yeah. Brian, I thought that was a false start at first on that play. I was like, is there a false start there? Like, why are two wide receivers not moving? It was so frustrating. I mean, but like to the specifics of it, right? The scan. Why does the team want to use the scan? They want to get into the perfect play, right? You want to see the look, change the play if you need to. If not,
get out of bad
plays.
Yeah,
get out of bad plays. Right. Get out of bad. It looks that you're not anticipating, right? Like you want to be advantageous in that regard. Why it's bad right now is that you are lacking the rhythm offensively, right? There's guys that are just not, because what happens is guys ready to go, up, scan, we're going to take another 20 seconds of the game clock, we're looking over, we're changing things. You're making guys think too much, man. Nobody's loose right now. Everything's tight. When you have to change your thought process in an instant, get into a new play, what's my responsibility? You have young players right now that are failing you, or I should say inexperienced players, right? Because last game, you did not help Drew Pine at all. You did not. You didn't help him. He was a player that was not playing confidently. He wasn't, because I think he was thinking too much, and he was honing in on one player because he wasn't confident in what was happening around him. You have Lorenzo Styles, who is in his own head. You have running back room that is being misused. So now they're starting to question, like, hey, man, like, what's my role in this offense? I'm not really sure what my situation here is, right? So you are muddling just the coherency of this offense. Like, what is the game plan, man? What is the game plan? Let the guys be loose and go. They're thinking way, way too much. Because, Brian, back to the initial point, right? If we can sit here and have an intelligent conversation and come to the conclusion that, hey, Chris Tyree is really talented, right? He's arguably the fastest running back in the entire country, right? Like, we can have that conversation. I think we can come halfway there. I think most people can look at Lorenzo Styles and say, yep, that dude's very talented from a physical perspective. Like, he's quick, he's explosive, he's got all those things. Michael Mayer is going to go in the first round in April. We can agree with those types of things, right? So what is the reason that the majority of your football players offensively are not playing well? It's not a talent issue. Like, throw that talent issue out of the way. There is a misuse, and there is a clouding of roles and clouding of confidence in this offense right now. So back to the scan, is that you are destroying rhythm. You're destroying a consistent thought process. You're muddling a player's minds. They just are. Players don't understand what the responsibilities are. And when they do, it's coming late in the play, and now I have to make a quick decision, and it's just there's no decisiveness in this offense right now.
I think decisiveness is a good word, Ryan, because this team plays with no urgency at wide receiver. They don't play with urgency at receiver. They don't play with urgency at quarterback. We even going back to when Tyler Buckner was here, we're now watching Drew Pine on Saturday, there's no urgency. And that comes from how you practice. And when you constantly do that slow delay stuff, right? And every team coaches that. It's called your 4-minute offense, right? Yep. And what you're doing is you're and the thought is, and here it's I understand why they're doing it. I just think it's a poor thought process. It's, well, it goes back to you don't think you have talent, which is silly. So then you start convincing yourself, well, we got a really small margin for error, which I've heard said through different sources as what is believed by the guy running the offense. Very, very small margin for error. So then you think I've got to then go be the guy that saves everything with my wonderful play calling, right? And so it's always about let's get in the right call. And it's a complete opposite. should be true. And we discussed this last night. This complete opposite should be true. If what you believe is true, then what you're doing is the last thing you're doing, because so much of what Notre Dame does on offense is built around you need guys to win. You need guys to win one-on-one go routes off the ball. You need guys to win ISO routes in the slot. You're not scheming these kids up. And when you go with this slow down approach, you lose all your tempo, you lose all sense of urgency. You force them to make quick reads and decisions every single time you make a check, right?
Yep. And
then the other thing you do is you kind of put yourself into situations where you can't really do any real shifting and motioning, right? Because that's effective. Because what they're doing is they will motion and shift, but then they will then look over at the sideline, and by that time the defense is lined up and has been able to adjust to what they did. So the only real motion they can do, Ryan, is a quick motion across, and that is it.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, like Stanford will used to do things back in the day, you know, because that's probably the closest to what Notre Dame's trying to be, where they would come in out of 12 personnel. They'd line up in a twins, one side and a tight end, a wing, and then they would shift over and then motion a guy across. And as they're doing all that, bam, the ball's coming out, snap. So you don't have time to adjust. You're looking, you're making checks, you're bumping the offensive lineman over defensive lineman over because they've shifted strength and all this, and they're snapping the ball and you're mid shift. Right. But when you do all that, then stop and look at the sideline, you've done nothing. You've done nothing to the defense to impact the defense. Nothing. Mm-hmm. And then also it's very easy to kind of get a sense of what they're going to do. And so what's frustrating is they weren't doing this as much last year, but it's similar in the philosophy of what was so bad about what we saw from the offense last year. Because I remember you look at the last 6 games last year, and it's worse this year than it was last year. Partly because the competition's better this year than it was last year. But when you look at last year, you know, you had the breakout, you had the one good game against Florida State, and then it was a bunch of really until, you know, USC started to kind of come alive, and really it wasn't North Carolina. And then and what was it? It was, and last year you couldn't even run the ball. It was slow tempo, can't protect the quarterback. You're trying a bunch of downfield routes, but your receivers aren't getting separation. You're running a bunch of static ISO routes with either stop routes or one-on-ones, and your guys can't win enough one-on-ones, and your receivers aren't making plays and all this. Same mantra. It's that they're just not good. And it was about 2 weeks ago, we started hearing 2 weeks ago, boy, if Brian Kelly can win X amount of games, it's going to be the greatest coaching job we've ever seen, blah, 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 right? And what happened? They changed. They went to more tempo, not like Oregon tempo, but they went to more tempo. They went to more, getting quick games, spreading the field, getting your backs involved in different aspects of the game, getting your receivers in movement routes, getting guys on crossing routes, doing more jet sweeps to your guys that are actually fast, you know, things like that. And then all of a sudden the offense starts looking good, right? And then, you know, the thing about it is Ryan, is it's there to be seen, and you just went through this, and we're going through the same thing over and over again. And so now it's even worse because you're doing the scan stuff. So if you have a young group of guys, if you lack talent, then you should be doing things to neutralize your lack of perceived talent. If you genuinely believe that, then the things you should be doing are pushing the tempo, not letting the defense get set up, right? Why do we see all these teams with okay talent go out there and score 40 points a game? What do they all do, Ryan? What do they all do? They run tempo. They're either a spread or an air raid team. They run tempo. You don't get lined up, and they run a very small number of plays, and they use tempo and spacing to create plays. Tempo and spacing. Notre Dame does neither of those things. You're running an offense that would be ideal if you had the 2019 offensive skill, which means you have Jimmy Clausen, Michael Floyd, Golden Tate, Kyle Rudolph, because you can win one-on-one. That's not the offense you should use if you don't have that kind of talent. It's the exact opposite of the kind of offense you should use in that instance. And so those are the things they need to do. If you genuinely believe you have lack of talent, you use your personnel correctly and pick up the tempo. And I'm not a tempo guy, right? But with this team with so much inexperience, what you're doing clearly isn't working. And against Carolina, they did go with a little bit of a better pace with some of their motions and things like that, created big opportunities. And now we've seen them slowly slow down since then. And like what we saw in the last 2 weeks looked nothing like what we saw against North Carolina from a tempo, from a motion, from a movement, from all those standpoints. And you're like, why?
Well,
Why?
Brian,
It's two bad defenses. Why?
And that's why I push back so hard on the lack of talent conversation. That's why, because if this was a offense that genuinely thought that they had a lack of talent, it would be operating in a different way. To your point, right? Because like, why is pre-snap movement so important? You're manipulating eyes on the second and third level. Like you're getting guys to get out of position and look in wrong spots. Like that's the whole point. If I was a team that because there's been a big conversation about the wide receivers, right? Don't work well against press, can't handle, working at the line of scrimmage, release points, all that stuff. Well, then if you truly believe that your receivers are the problem and are the issue, why am I not stacking more wide receivers? Why am I not doing short motions to maximize release points, to get my guys clear space coming off the line of scrimmage? This team doesn't operate like that, Brian. So like either that Notre Dame does not have talent, but even if your moniker is that Notre Dame doesn't have talent, which I will always push back against, I just always will. If that's the case, then coaching is still an issue because you're not playing like a team that has a lack of talent. Like it's dumbfounding me, man. It's like that you're not acting like a team that doesn't have talent, but then you're also not acting like a team that does have talent. You're like just a neutral team right now. And it's a lack of identity at this time, man. Like it's a lack of identity. Right. There is nothing about this team that says, I know exactly what my players do well, and I'm going to maximize it. Like you don't play like that. Right. I mean, we talked about Chris Tyree, right? Like we talked about it earlier on the phone. It's like Chris Tyree, you're using him like he is Audric Estime, to your point, right? You're using him like every Stanford running back ever, the Toby Gerhardts and the Stephon Taylors and the Tyler Gaffneys, who are all good football players, right? But they're not the same player as a Chris Tyree. Why am I not using him out of the slot and motioning him and getting him a jet occasionally? Why am I not running outside zone? Why am I not mixing up the inside and outside run game? I'm not saying you make him an exclusive outside zone or stretch runner. But what I'm saying is that you can mix it up. You can mix and match and make him so much more explosive. I don't understand why you are limiting your best assets because that's a 4-3 kid in the backfield. You have 2 4-4 kids outside. You have a tight end that's going in the first round. Why are you not maximizing any of them? I mean,
you're not, and that's the thing. They're not using the speed that they have. So well, why our running backs can't create big plays? Well, hey, man, how about you just maybe a couple times a game get your 4-3 running back to do something out there? And here's the other thing. Let's talk about the run game. Let's talk about the run game now. That's a good transition, good segue into the run game. The run game makes zero sense to me. The run game is basically where is duo more popular right now, Ryan? College or NFL? Where's it more popular in your opinion?
Oh, the NFL, easy.
By far.
Yeah.
And so what is the play that worked most for Notre Dame this year in the last couple of years? Their best run play and early in the year when they started to get their run game going against Carolina, inside zone. Have you seen an inside zone be run in the last 2 weeks? I haven't. I haven't.
No.
They've gone back to what are the 2 plays? Chris Tyree's big plays as a running back have been on what? Counter,
inside and outside
inside zone. Inside zone. His 80-something yard or his 90-something yard touchdown against Syracuse was on inside zone. His touchdown against Clemson in 2020 was on inside zone. His big runs last year were on inside zone. That's what he does. That's what he ripped North Carolina with was inside zone. You've eliminated that, and you're now running duo, which is more of an Audric Estime run, but then you're not giving Audric Estime the ball on duo early on. You're giving it to Chris Tyree. And then the other thing is, I can't tell you the last time I saw Chris Tyree run outside on a run that was designed to go outside. Not seen him run an outside zone. And the way they're running counter is really just abysmal. And the blocking is fine, but the way that they're bringing the other second blockers on counter and then the footwork and the timing, the backfield is a mess. We've been talking about that all year. It's gotten a little better, but not a whole lot. And you're not allowing your backs to kind of get downhill. They're almost running into the back of the blockers the moment they get the ball. That's bad timing on a counter play. We're not seeing Chris Tyree ran a couple jets early. I don't want him running jet sweeps, really. I mean, he can do it, I guess, over some other guys, but I want to see him running outside zone. I want to see you toss it with him where you let your big physical offensive line really get some width and create a vertical insertion for him to get to hammer with. right?
Yep.
And then your inside stuff becomes more effective because teams just can't crowd the box like they're doing the last 3 games, knowing that you're not going to get outside. And then you don't even do it with your pass game. So run game has been a mess. There's no diversity in the run game whatsoever, and that needs to change, right? So right now they're basically duo, counter, and I've seen a couple mid zones. That's really it. They'll let Logan Diggs run some stretch and outside zone or the same blocking scheme, but they're for the most part, but they're different runs. They affect the defense differently. They need to do more outside zone and stretch together. The difference is one is more of a pistol run, one is more of a shotgun run. The stretch kind of works downhill at a wide 45. Outside zone is more of a lateral run where you're getting, so blocking doesn't change a lot, but the outside zone is going to take a little bit longer to develop, which is a good thing because it creates more of a vertical running lane. Okay.
Yeah.
So you need to add some of that kind of stuff. And you go back to the 2017 offensive line and they ran inside zone, they ran counter, they had a lead play, but they also ran G scheme, which is kind of an off tackle play, and they ran buck sweep. So you couldn't just kind of work on loading the box because they would run all that other stuff. I mean, I'm talking about the read zone stuff. One of the best runs they had on Saturday was a read zone where Drew Pine pulled it. So he can do that, right? And we know he can do that. But you don't even need that stuff. Like, you don't need to run power O to be effective because you don't have a quarterback that can do that. And I'm not a big fan of throwing Wildcat in there just because in order to get it to work, you have to practice it a lot, which takes away other things. You don't need that. But there are things you can do with the outside zone. Harry can coach buck sweep. I mean, Notre Dame destroyed people with buck sweep in 2017. Right. And what it does, because here's what it does. We talked about this last night in the show, Ryan, is it gives you so much more versatility if teams are king things. And we talked about a play, and I've seen other teams do it, but Chip Long did this in 2018. If you remember against USC, Notre Dame ran a lot of counter. They ran a lot of buck sweep. So what USC was doing is they were just flying downhill as soon as they saw the guards pull, and they were eating up the Notre Dame run game early. So what Chip Long did is he said they called buck sweep to the right, but he took Dexter Williams and ran him on a sweep to the left, and there was nobody out there. Cole Kmet had to make one block. He made it. Might have been Brock Wright. Either one of those two tight ends, Brock Wright or Cole Kmet, had one block to make, and if you can make that block, it's a touchdown. He made that block, and it was a touchdown, right? But what are you going to do off duo? What can you possibly do off duo? And the way they're running duo is confusing, very confusing
very
to
confusing.
me. And it's not effective. For the most part. So you look at it and you say, you're not making it difficult for the defense. They know when you're running the ball, they know it's going to be here or here. That's it. That is it. And so schematically, there needs to be a much greater inside-out mix in the run game. Has to be. Has to be. And then what that then does is that creates some more RPO opportunities, which is the next thing. So first of all, personnel-wise, I know Tommy Rees loves Logan Diggs, and that's about the only running back I feel like they're at all scheming for to his skill set. Is like the only one the last 2 games. All the others just kind of plugging them in for what they like, which is dumb. If they're going to use 3 running backs, use them. They need to use 3 running backs. My point is the outside stuff that would work for Chris Tyree would also work really well for Logan Diggs. Right? The outside zone, the buck sweeps, the things like that, those would also be really good with a kid like Logan Diggs, who likes to be patient and let things happen and bounce, and then bam, he'll hit it. Right? So you're not only hurting Chris Tyree, you're hurting Logan Diggs and minimizing how good he can be with some of these runs as well. And so those are things schematically, plus using your personnel properly is important. The other thing is if you want to be a running team, you better use RPOs. And their lack of use of RPOs and their lack of the only RPOs they really do are just like little quick slides to the tight end, and that's fine. Those are okay. But your lack of creativity, no bubble screens. I mean, we'll get to screens in a little bit, but if you want to protect your run game, then RPOs have to be a part of what you're doing. You have to get some glances. You have to get some goes. You have to get some hitches. You have, for the love of God, give me a now screen or a bubble screen off. I mean, I still can't believe in 2022 there is a Division I offense that can't stop a backside crash. And Stanford knew it. when Stanford had a read on that Notre Dame was definitely running to a direction, they would crash the backside backer or the corner from the backside, and Notre Dame could do nothing about it. There was one play where they crashed the corner, and the safety just stood there because he knew they weren't going to throw it to him. Just stood there. Didn't get over, just took one step and stopped because he knew they weren't going to throw it to the receiver, because the receiver's like, the receiver pointed to it, but then he's like, okay, I don't know what to do. I got to go block somebody. There was no thought in his head of, we're going to pull and throw it. Why? Because that wasn't an option.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're gonna run the way they do and you're not doing RPOs, you're failing your team. You're failing your team. You're not putting your players in position to be successful. Every defensive coordinator hates RPOs. Every single one.
Yes.
And yet Notre Dame won't run them.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It's stupid. It's dumb. It's easy. And then now you don't need the perfect play. That's what RPOs are built for. It's to protect you from not needing to be in. If they want to load the box and crash the edge, cool, pull and throw it. I don't got to scan and get the right call and, hey, I think they're going to crash the edge. Let's check to a path. It's built in.
RPO is a scan, if we're being honest.
Exactly.
Like, it
it's much easier
is.
to read one. It's much easier. Really, and you can run your pass concepts off RPO. You can run a lot. I mean, you can't run like a flood concept off RPO, but you can run a lot of the stuff you do with RPOs. It's not just hitches and quick outs, which is all Notre Dame really does. It's not just screens. That's part of it. I've seen teams throw post routes off RPO.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with RPOs that would influence the defense far greater than having Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles crash on the safeties. Mm-hmm. You're not affecting the defense at all, especially when those safeties are so dang tight that it doesn't matter anyway. And so you're running these plays where I've seen plays in the last 2 weeks where the 5 Notre Dame linemen were blocking 6, 7 dudes, and they still couldn't get to everybody. I've seen it. Yep. There was a play on Saturday on the touchdown run from Audric Esme. Joe Alt took out 2 dudes. Did you see that?
I did.
He destroyed the backside end. That kid is playing at such a high level. Destroys the backside end, and then takes out the linebacker that was trying to scrape over. Like, you need that to have a successful play.
Yeah. One positive that we may need to have at some point, Brian, is the fact that Joe Alt might be the best left tackle in college football. He might be right now, which is pretty wild to think about, man. Like, we thought it could happen, but like, he's playing at such a high level. Like, he's up there with the Skoronskis, the Paris Johnsons. Like, he's in that conversation right now, man, which is pretty wild. But to your point, Brian, we talked about a small margin for error. How do you make your margin for error smaller? By not having options, right? Like, you don't have options. That's like
that's a great point, Ryan.
I mean, because it's like, all right, so the run game, right?
Explain it.
Diversity, right? If I know that a team is just running, let's just, for the sake, we'll stick with duo because that's what we've been talking about a ton. If I know a team is just basically like 80% of their run game is duo, then you know what I'm setting up to stop? Duo. Like, that's just so easy, man.
And duo and counter can be stopped in a very similar fashion.
They can.
They're both double team to the second level blocks. They're the same family. There's no variation. If you can stop one, you can stop the other. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. And then what happens now, Brian, is that when you become 2-1 notes, also, why would I respect you outside, right? Like, I'm going to press you, and I'm going to put an extra member in the box, an extra player in the box, because I haven't seen any RPO action off of it. Why is RPO so effective? Because you force a team to make a decision. Either I'm going to sacrifice that player out in space to get him in the box. That's why you pull and you throw it. Or he's going to be disciplined against the RPO, against the pass option of the run pass option, and then you have a lighter box. When you don't have that element and you're also not running a variety of different run looks, you are limiting options. And when I'm a defensive coordinator, when I'm a guy calling a defense against an offense, if I know you are only good at 1 or 2 things, man, I'm going to have a field day because I know exactly what's coming. Now, if you're good at 1, 2, 3, or let's not even that far. Let's say you're still only good at 2 things, but you show me 3 or 4 other things. My mind still has to defend that, man. Like, I still have to be prepared to stop multiple things. Right now, Notre Dame is not multiple with how they attack offensively. I know exactly what Notre Dame's doing. They are very basic offense. Like you said, Brian, they basically just want to run the football, and then they want to hit a They just want to hit a slide route off of it at times. Like, that's what they want to do right now. Like, there's not much creativity in that sense, right? So again, we're coming back to the simple fact of you are pigeonholing players, because we've talked a bunch about the running backs, right? Estime, Diggs, and Tyree can work so well together because they're all such different football players. Well, why am I asking different football players to do the same exact thing? Why am I doing that? That doesn't fit into their strengths. That is only tapping into a one-note offense right now.
And it tells me there's one guy that you think is the best of all of them that you just,
which means that you're putting, well, you're taking two other square pegs and trying to fit it into your round hole. Like, that's what you're doing. There's only one clean fit, and you're limiting two other football players in that instance, right? And that is just, again, I don't want to hear about a lack of talent if you're not even using the talent you have appropriately. If you are using it appropriately, if you're mixing up the looks and they're not making plays, then it's a player issue. Then it's a talent issue. That's not what's happening right now. Diversify a little bit. You don't have, because Brian, like, this is another big misnomer, right? Another big misnomer. Running RPOs is not complicated, right? It's not complicated. It's easy. Right. It's basic stuff. Run it off of it. It's not something that you have to be perfect with, man. Make things easy. Things are not easy for you right now, and you're making it harder than it has to be.
Because if you have players that, again, let's work with the assumption that you don't think you have talent, then what you need to do is you need to make sure that what you do with them, they know how to master, right? And you know, like, look, I'm going to use like an NFL as an example. Is Cooper Kupp one of the 10 most physically gifted receivers in the NFL? Now, one of the knocks on him, I think people underrate his physical talent, right? But my point is, like, you look at last year, and I haven't paid attention this year, but was he one of the 10 most physically talented wide receivers in the NFL last year? I'd say no. I'd argue no. But he was one of the most effective. Why? Because he is a master of his craft, right? Now, on a much smaller scale in college, it's, look, why are RPOs so effective? People ask us, like, how can RPOs be so effective when they don't run a lot of plays? And the answer is there's a lot of factors. There's spacing, tempo, RPOs make it hard to defend. But the other part of it is these kids know exactly what to do on these limited number of routes that they run. And so they're really good at those particular routes. Now, the problem when they get the NFL is they can't run the other 25 routes that you need to run in the NFL, right? That's why a lot of RPO kids struggle. But the reason in college they're really good is because you ask them to do a certain number of things and do it really, really well. There are about 5 or 6 things you should ask Braden Lindsay to do that he does really, really well. There are about 4 or 5 things that Lorenzo Styles can do really, really well that you should be asking him to do. There are about 4 or 5 things that Jaden Thomas can do really, really well, and you should be having him do those things. They're not all the same thing. So first of all, stop asking them to do 15 different things.
And I don't want them all to be the same. I don't want them all to be the same. I want diversity. Yeah.
And so my point is, and the point Ryan is making is simplify what you're doing. Make sure these kids are masters at what you're doing. That should be your sole focus moving forward. Here's what we're good at. And let's focus on that. But here's things we need to do to protect what we're good at. So we think we're good at running the football. And they are. The last 3 games have been very good at running the football, Stanford game included, because there are not a lot of teams that could have run for 150 yards against that kind of box with that kind of play calling and those kind of issues in the pass game. I mean, they were getting 7-8 yard runs on 10-man boxes. Yep. Dead serious. I can show you the clips. And so you're doing that. They had a 10-yard touchdown run where literally Audric Estime did not get touched by a soul.
Yep.
That's on the offensive line. If you had a better offensive coordinator and better play calling and planning and preparation, then you'd have over 200 yards rushing at Stanford like everybody else does. So the offensive line was not the problem. The coordination, the game plan was the problem. So what do you do to protect that? Mix up your run diversity. We're talking better use your personnel. Mix up your run diversity from not again, we're not saying run 12 different run concepts. I'm good with 4 or 5, 6 run concepts, but make sure there's a good inside out diversity. Like a draw play doesn't work when all you do is run up the middle and teams don't respect your vertical passing game. Draw play doesn't work.
Was that a draw play on the first run of the game?
I think the first play was going to be it was the same look. I think the first play was going to be something different. I think a draw was the second play. Gotcha. But it was out of the same exact look, and it was the same exact backfield movement. The blocking was different.
Yep.
I'd have to go back and look, but I think it was like duo maybe or something like that on the first play. But they ran the same look and then the same backfield action, and because it was clearly a draw on the second one for sure.
Yes.
So to me, it's doing those things and then using RPOs to protect them. If teams want to crash, then just throw a quick bubble screen out there, steal yards, throw a now screen out there, do some stack stuff. Because here's the thing about stack is, especially if you go wide, is you now put them into a bind. If you're just always a slot formation with a slot receiver that's splitting the difference between the tackle and the wide receiver, the widest receiver, then you make it a little bit easier for them to kind of play games there. So they can have sort of 3-on-2. You go to a bit of a stack look. Now they've got to widen that safety out or widen that slot linebacker out or slot nickel out. And now all of a sudden you've put them in a little bit of a bind. The answer to that is
hard to play press coverage against that too.
Yes. And then also, right. And then also, Ryan, if you either need to walk your nickel or linebacker out or bring your safety down or keep your safety back and bring that guy in or bring that guy in and bring your safety down. Now all of a sudden you got some matchups that you like.
Yes.
Stanford kind of did that in that 12 personnel that Tobias Murray ran the touchdown pass on. They had kept one safety back. They loaded the box. You put Tobias in a one-on-one in the slot, and I think it was Lorenzo was outside in a one-on-one. It was either him or Lindsey, I think. And then you had one safety. Mayer occupied the safety, and you had a one-on-one with Tobias Merriweather, and there's not a dude on Stanford's roster that can cover Tobias Merriweather. And they went to it. Imagine that, right? But there's things that you can do to force them into that more frequently. And if they want to kind of play off, then you now screen them to death. You bubble screen them. You run a slant. There's lots of things you can do. Right, you can have the inside guy block out and run an inside tunnel route off of and not a lot of teams run RPO off duo because the NFL is a different offense than college football. But there's things you can do with RPO, especially the way you're running it, where you can do that. So I mean, honestly, I don't know why they have this incessant desire to run duo. Inside zone's been their best run. And there's more you can do off of inside zone than duo. From an alignment, from a movement standpoint, all that kind of stuff. They're trying to combine inside zone movement with duo blocking, and it's just not working, in my opinion. They're just out-talenting people when they do run the ball effectively, which is, again, what makes it so ironic that there's this mantra about not having talent on this football team.
And they also, I mean, Brian, what's another thing that they want to do with the inside zone look is that they run a lot of cross zone action too, right? With the tight end. So the tight end's coming across, and then that gives you an easy flat route or the slide route, whatever, off of it. When you're running duo, they're running duo almost the same way though, man. Like they're taking that tight end and they're just running like that cross action. I just don't get it. I think they're an inside zone team that is trying to be something that they're not. Like that's what it's. And you know what else is in my opinion, and maybe it's not the best for Audric Estime, but all three of your running backs can run inside zone pretty effectively, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Like if there is
I think Estime could run that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think he can. I don't know if that's his best run, but he can run it. He can be effective running that. But for Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs, I think they're both very effective inside zone runners. Very effective.
Yes. I think Audric Estime flat out could run all the things that they'd be asking him to do. Yeah. I do. And keep running duo and just run it when Audric's in there if you want to. I mean, whatever. But I don't personally would kind of scrap it. And so to me, I look at those different things. Here's the bare minimum of what you need to do. You've got to at least do more of an inside-outside mix. If you don't want to scrap duo for inside zone, fine. I don't agree with it, but I can live with it. But you got to add some stuff on the perimeter. And it can't just be just a couple outside zones a game. It's got to be a balance that makes them respect all of it. And then you have to add RPO because if you start running outside zone, you're going to have a lot of teams that are going to be. And this is why I love probably my favorite play to RPO is outside zone, because the way that it influences. If you're good at running outside zone, then you stretch that sucker. That forces the backside of the defense to collapse to protect against the vertical cutback. Because I mean, there was a play I think it was against North Carolina in 2017. They ran buck sweep to the boundary. And I believe because that was the game where Alex Bars got hurt. This is 2017. Alex Bars got hurt in the first half. So they actually had Hunter Biven in at right guard. He was a right guard. They ran buck sweep to the left. And now he pulls. And so then the center works. Josh Adams cut behind the center and the right guard out to the left for a 70-yard touchdown in that game.
Because that's
zone? The kind of – yes, and it was a vertical – no, it was a buck sweep. It was a vertical insertion, right, because you're getting the width, right? So the play side guard pulls, the backside guard pulls, then the center is kind of pushing back. and he cut between the center and the right guard on a run to the outside left because of the way that the stretch happens. So even though it was a vertical cut, his vertical cut on basically a toss essentially was behind the right guard and center on a run to the outside to the left. Well, what does that force the defense to do? You've got to really suck down inside because it takes Chris Tyree or Logan Diggs gashing you once or twice on that. You're going to start to squeeze. So then what I do, I ride that outside zone. I ride it. And as soon as I see that guy crash, pull and throw the bubble, throw the tunnel, throw the now, throw the slant, whatever.
And then you're 2-on-1. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
This isn't rocket science, man. This is easy stuff. And know what you've done is you've now put an additional stress on the defense, which makes it easier because to create run lanes. Because the reason the backs aren't ripping off a lot of long runs, because there's no room to rip off a lot of big runs. Because there's no threat of you are not threatening them at all outside the tackle tight end box at all. So let's go to the pass game, Ryan.
Yep.
First thing is about the personnel. We talked about this. Every team that they've played so far has almost exclusively come up and pressed them, almost exclusively. And you're just not doing stuff to make them stop. And part of that is your receivers still aren't great at getting off the press. They're better than they've been. Your quarterback isn't making the throws. Lorenzo Styles had a guy beat for what, it would have required a good ball, but it should have happened. We're seeing other teams hit it on Notre Dame. Lorenzo Styles has this guy stacked. He's got him beat, and he underthrows it. And it was so far underthrown that it should have been pass interference, but I understood why they didn't call pass interference because it was so underthrown that it was like, I don't know if he can catch that ball anyway. And maybe how bad the ball was forced the defender the contact because he had to jump so far back inside, right? So shouldn't have been a back shoulder number one. Throw it over top, right? So those things need to happen. You need to start doing more things with the movements, with the stacks to get Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles off that press coverage, force teams to defend it differently. Those are all things that need to happen. But the other thing you need to do is this is where 15 and 16 come into account. 15 being Tobias Merriweather, 16 being Dan Colsey. Because if they can just get any kind of – there was a play on Saturday where Tobias didn't get a great release, and I just said, throw it anyway. Just throw it up. Throw it at about 9 feet and let Tobias go get it. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. But it's no different than you having to throw it away because nobody was open. Take your shots because you know what he's going to do. Over half the time, he's going to make that play. As you've said, Ryan, if you're doing 50-50 balls right, they're not 50-50 balls. No, and when you have guys like Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather and Eli Raritan and Michael Mayer and all that, they're not 50-50 balls. They're really not. So reduce your outside splits on some of these one receiver looks. There's no reason for a single receiver to the field to be out by the numbers. None. Reduce your splits and give your quarterback time. I mean, you can run basically the same thing as a wide fade from a single receiver side if you give yourself enough room. Because teams aren't respecting you. So you can use that. This is using how teams are defending you to your advantage. Against most defenses, Ryan, I would not do that. I would not have split my receivers splits down to throw an outside fade or an outside go route. Normally, against quarters, it doesn't work. Against cover 3, it doesn't work. Against most good teams, it doesn't work. But the way teams are defending you, they're not respecting you out there. So all you got to do is beat them a couple times, and all of a sudden people are like, you know what? They're putting these trees out there and just throwing the ball up to them, and there's nothing they can do about it. So we now have to play a more traditional defense to defend against that, which now opens up the run lane. It opens up the middle of the field even more. And so, BYU had a bad game plan. We asked them, what was BYU doing on defense? We didn't understand it. Well, Stanford didn't have a bad game plan, and they shut it down. And Notre Dame did nothing to try to threaten them except a couple near the sideline go routes. Well, if you want to run that stuff, then put your trees in and let them run it. Okay, put Deion in the game, let him run it. Put Tobias in the game, let him run it, and become more of a threat. Use Eli Raritan in some of those instances. And why have they thrown a single ball to Michael Mayer in a one-on-one outside? I would start doing him more outside in some of those instances. Let him because then see how the defense reacts. Put him outside, and then you get some sort of isolation inside with Lorenzo or Braden or Tobias or Jaden Thomas or whoever else. So those are things that they need to do. And when you're going to have Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles on the field, especially together, you've got to move them pre-snap. You can't just have them slot outside, move them, get them off the field, invert your stuff, move them down. Do different things like that. Allow them to get cleaner releases because when they get clean releases, they've been very hard to guard this year. And so, and then design plays for them to get the ball there. right?
Mhm.
And then post snap, it's the same concept, right? Do more post snap stuff where you're on the run. You got to really limit the static routes. Because again,
Okay.
if you don't have big time players, then the static routes really don't work that effectively. They just don't.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, there was a play on Saturday where I'm watching it. It was several times where Michael Mayer releases off the line and the safety just stood there. You
Yeah.
want to know why Mayer wasn't getting much separation? Because the safeties were just standing there waiting on him because they knew he wasn't going to run past them. Not that he can't, but he
Right.
wasn't going to.
Because he's running sticks and he's running option routes. Like that's all
Right.
he's doing, man.
And
Like
the only
it's just
time he runs vertical, it's a backside release, and they're not worried about him anyway because they're passing him off to somebody else. And he
exactly.
literally he just stood there. And then you're wondering why there's, and then they're collisioning Mayer, and he's coming open late. By that time, it's too late. And then, the times they were throwing it to him, it's like he was open a couple times, but it's like you got to throw a perfect ball out there. Okay, so use that to your advantage, or move him outside, and then get your safety in an ISO against somebody else, and then let Mayer have a one-on-one or something like that. I mean, run a post go concept with Tobias and Michael Mayer. Safety's got to cover Tobias or not, and then if he doesn't, you throw it to him. If they double him, you throw it to him, and then have Braden Lindsay or Lorenzo backside running a crosser route. If they want or an over route, if they want to get up underneath it, then you got a dude coming underneath. Because what's the only way they can defend that, right? Safety goes to take Mayer, linebackers drop and get underneath Tobias, right? It's about the only way they can defend it. So what do? Here comes Braden Lindsay or Lorenzo on a crossing route.
Right. Climb, yeah, something. Yep.
There you go. Yep. Where is that? Well, they did that once on Saturday. Reverse. Mm-hmm. You had Mayer in the slot or number 3, Tobias number 2. And they ran that concept, and what happened? 41-yard touchdown because you put the defense in a bind, and everybody was moving. There was no stops on that. It was a in and a seam or a post and a go. Everybody was moving.
Yep.
Bam, big play. And so this stuff is in the offense, Ryan. It's there in the offense. You're just not using it. You're just not using it.
I don't get the fascination with the static routes right now because I mean, Brian, it's like they're treating the offense like they do have Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey on the field all the time. Like it's like again, I talked about it on Saturday. It's like you think you're Stanford, man. It's like you think that you just have 6'3", 6'4" all over the place, and you're just going to throw to bad leverage or to good leverage for yourself, bad leverage for defenders, right? So. It's just something really weird because, like, again, I want to get Braden Lindsay on the run. I want to get Lorenzo Styles on the run. I want to get those guys moving, man. Where's the crossers? Where's the climbs? Where's the inside slants, vertical, outside and in cut? Like, where are these things, man? Right. There's things that could be happening because running a hitch with Braden Lindsay, yeah, you're going to get it occasionally because there's going to be guys off of him at times because he's fast, but like. That's not utilizing Braden Lindsay to the best possible way. Like Braden Lindsay's averaging what, like 8-9 yards a catch right now? Right. Like it's pathetic, man. 4 kids averaging 9 yards a catch right now. Like it's just not advantageous to you. Not advantageous.
I think the other thing too is one of the things that they did last year is they went to a much better. They went to quick game more. They get rid of the ball faster, and it worked last year because of how teams played them. Teams are not playing them in a way where that's necessarily the answer, the way that they're running it. I think what the movement also does is it allows you to get in some looks where you can have some fun, So like if you want to go to a 2x2, have Braden Lindsay in the backside, send him in motion to get into a 3x1 and have him run a slide to the field. And now all of a sudden you've got to chase him, and then you run a couple slants behind him, or maybe a skinny post or a quick post with a hitch behind it. Get into some of your curl flat stuff with those looks. Because now they're going to see the fast guy going in motion. They're going to play that, and you've got some stuff coming behind it. So you can then use that stuff to create some of your static route concepts. So there's just a lot of simple stuff. And this is not – and then if you're able to hit some of the stuff we talked about, hit those go routes, right, hit to your big guys, do more things where you're attacking teams vertically, all of a sudden defenses are going to be forced to back off. They're either going to have to back off their corners, they're going to have to back off a safety and play more too high. And the minute you start getting teams to play more traditional too high against you, your run game has more room to work. It all goes together. And the more ground they have to cover when you do hit some of your perimeter screen stuff. Because right now they're making all that stuff easy to defend. So you're going to have to attack down the field. And if you don't think Braden Lindsay and Lorenzo Styles are capable of doing that and Jane Thomas is capable of doing that, then you need to put guys in that can. And this is why we say it's process oriented and not results oriented, because people looked at the results of the BYU game. Jaden Thomas makes that play and all this, and they were like, oh, it's good. And what we were saying in the postgame show was, no, it's not really good, because you did stuff against a bad defense that they didn't defend well. And you just you can't count on Jaden Thomas making that kind of crazy play every game. And if you do want to make those kind of plays every game, then you need to make sure that you're getting those even bigger guys on there doing that. Right. And then, but they say, oh, this stuff worked. It worked force feeding the ball to Michael Mayer. And we said, it worked for this game, but you got to be careful. And that's kind of what happened. And that's what happens when you're results oriented and not process oriented. The process oriented looks at that game and says, we made some plays and I'm proud of the effort, but man, we can't keep doing that. We've got to make sure the quarterback's not locking on 87. We got to make sure the quarterback's not missing this read or that read or the other thing. We got to make sure we're really working on that, and let's do some things to give him opportunities to do that. Because if BYU can cover you up, there's some teams on your schedule that can. And if Stanford can cover you up, you're in trouble moving forward. Right. But again, it's about you're asking, you can complain all, and Braden Lindsey's the biggest whipping boy on the football team right now, which is just insane to me. Right. Because it's not his fault that they're using him that way.
Yep.
Right. Use him the way that his skill set. We've always said he's a complementary player. We've always said that, but you're not using him like a complementary player. You're trying to use him like you used Javon McKinley 2 years ago. 5'11", 185, 6'2", 220. They're different dudes.
Yes.
And that's how they're trying to use him. And it's stupid. And now fans, always looking for players to blame and rip on and criticize and all that. And then he becomes the whipping boy, when in reality, no smart football coach in America would look at Braden Lindsey and say, let's use him the way Notre Dame is using him. Not a one.
Yep.
And yes, I intended to say that the way that I said that. No smart football coach is going to do that. And so, he should not be your leading receiver. We've never said that. But if you can't find a way to use that kid in a game, you're just not a good football coach. He's not your guy. Stop treating him as if he is that and then ask him to do things he can't. Lorenzo, same thing. Jaden Thomas, same thing. You're hurting those kids by not using them to the areas that give them advantages. I would love to see them come out on a series and have Michael Mayer at tight end and Jaden Thomas in the slot and Tobias and Dion outside. I'd be so happy, because that fits who you're trying to be. Put those big horses out there and say, you want to load the box, we're just going to throw fades and we're going to do this kind of stuff and we're just going to eat you up, right? If that's who you want to be, then do that. And then use Lorenzo and Braden on mix-ups. But if you're going to have them outside and you're going to try to run the football, then you got to start doing more stuff that opens them up. More movement pre and post snap, more stacks, more screens, more stuff like that. And we kind of joked with the screen game. Our only note on the screen game is, I literally need to have one. And that's it. That was our note in the stream. You need to have one. You need to have a screen game. You don't have a screen game. Caught a couple slip screens. Yay. Other than Navy, have you seen a team in America? Have you watched any film this year where you didn't at least see one now screen being run? Have you literally watched a game yet this year where you haven't seen the other team run at least one now or bubble in a game?
Not that I can remember. No.
Well, that was a trick question. You have seen one.
Oh, wow.
It's Notre Dame.
I thought you meant other than Notre Dame.
No, I know. I did mean that. I'm just busting your chops to kind of bring it back.
I got you.
It's like when you're so smart that you know something that the rest of America doesn't run. Well, hey, I hate to break it to you, but the results are in, and that was a bad strategy. So fix it. And all the stuff we just talked about, Ryan, all of it is doable right now.
It's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack, like it's not a talent fix. It's not a recruiting fix. We're talking about just structural things that could change, just implementation, just roster stuff. Like these are the players, and this is the talent that's on the roster right now. We're just asking to maximize it differently, right? Like that's the biggest thing. We're not asking to hit the transfer portal right now and go get some guys, because you can't anyway. Right. So it doesn't matter, right? We're not asking you to go completely change your recruiting philosophy, because you need to get different players in here. Like this is something where you can do this in practice today if you felt like doing it. That's where we are at this point.
And what I'm saying too, Ryan, is nothing that we asked to change schematically is not already there in some fashion. And anything that is new is a minor tweak that I could do with Division III players. Like when you're in a single receiver to the field side, which Notre Dame does way more than I've ever seen a team do, putting your trips into the formation to the boundary and having one guy outside. You're doing that, and I'm thinking, oh, they're doing that to set up a go route. Nope, never. Once maybe, And it's like reduce your split because you're getting press with no safety help and just throw that thing out there. Mm-hmm. Once that guy wins, here's your coaching point. Drew, once he wins, throw it out to the numbers. Right? I mean, that's pretty it. Basic. That's your coaching point. Yeah. That's your coaching point. And then your speed guys will get separation that way. Your big guys will just be big. And then all of a sudden you're hitting these 30-yard gains. And then sometimes if you can really win off the line, you can outrun a guy and it's a big play. I mean, that's not something most teams can do because most teams get more respect than the Notre Dame offense gets from the offense. Right? And so those are the things you look at, Ryan. You say that's the only kind of new thing that they would have to put in to kind of get this thing going. That's it. That stuff is really simple stuff. But the inside zone, it's in the offense. Outside zone, it's in the offense. If Buck Sweep's not in the offense, then freaking put it in because I know you have an offensive line coach that knows how to coach it. I know you do. I've seen him do it for 70-yard touchdowns. I know it's there, right? But it's simple stuff. It's stuff that's there. Use the personnel you have. Because it's not a change in philosophy, it's a change in emphasis of what you already have. We know the crossers and the stuff and the meshes and all. We know that stuff's in there. We've seen them run it either last year or a couple times this year. That needs to be the emphasis, not what you're doing now. And so, what you can't do when you're criticizing a team is to start saying, well, you guys need to go run North Carolina's offense. You can't do that. That is a huge philosophical change in what they do. That requires different scheme, different terminology, different practice, everything. You can't do that. You cannot do that. That's more of a, in the offseason, if you move on or he leaves, you go hire that kind of guy to then bring that in. What we're talking about, Ryan, is stuff that you can do right now with your players, with your formations, with your scheme that's already there, with minor tweaks like alignment. Yeah. Right? That's it. Those are things anybody can tweak. And so I felt it was important for, if we're going to be critical, to say, okay, well then what would you do? Well, there you have it. Those are things you can do. And it's the same thing last year. We called for the changes all year last year, and then when they finally made them, the offense starts clicking. And my frustration is I thought we would see that stuff come out this year, and it didn't. Yeah. So get rid of scan, use tempo a little bit more effectively, use pre-snap movement a little bit more effectively on called routes. You're motioning to get something. If it's not there, you have built-in checkdowns. That's what every single coach in America does, right? Push the tempo a little bit more diversity in your run game. Get RPOs have to be a part of what you do. Use more movement post-snap from your receivers. Build around the strengths of your players and use your best players. When you have speed, use them for speed. Stop trying to fit them into what you want to do offensively. Fit your offense into what they do. That's what every good football coach does. And right now, Tommy Rees is not a good football coach. And I'll just flat out say it. Now, can he be? Yeah, he can. But it's going to require him to swallow his pride, which is something I don't think he's capable of. It's going to require him to look in the mirror and say, this is on me, and genuinely say that. Not the coach speak of, oh, I'm in charge and all that, and then you walk in your office like, these guys freaking suck, all that kind of stuff. None of that. Look in the mirror and say, this is on me, and we're going to fix it. These are my dudes. This is what I have. This is how we're going to roll with it. Because I think what's going to happen is you're going to see less players playing, and you're going to see who fits what he wants to do better, and then he's gonna just play those guys. So don't be shocked if we see less Audric and Chris Tyree. Don't be shocked if we don't see any changes at receiver with Dion and Tobias. Don't be shocked if we don't see those things based on how he is and how he's been. But if he's one to look in the mirror and say, you know what, this was on me. This is my fault. This is on me. And this is what we're going to do, then they can change now and they can roll. And then one of two things can happen. If he comes back next year, then he's regained trust of the team and all these kind of things. So I'm going to tell you right now, we're not the only ones. All I'm going to say is this. Me and you and the fans are not the only ones pissed and unhappy with how things are going right now. I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay.
Yep.
But you can fix all that if you're willing to do what a man does, which is look in the mirror and say, I'm the leader. This ain't working. It ain't their fault. It's mine. It's mine.
Mm-hmm.
And then freaking fix it. And if he's willing to do that, then I think this thing can get rolling. I do. If he's not, then it's going to be more of the same. Some weeks it'll look good. He'll have that one game where he calls a good game and puts a good game plan together, and then they'll crap the bed the next 2 weeks, and we'll all blame the players. And then they'll have a new offensive coordinator come in next year, and all of a sudden these same freaking players, at least the ones that don't transfer, all of a sudden going to look good. Like, wow, who knew? Right? Same crap. And that's what needs to happen. And I don't think he's willing to do that, Ryan. So that's my challenge to him. Be a man, right? Look in the mirror, own this, and then be – and owning it means what? What I thought was going to work isn't working. So we're gonna shift course, and I'm gonna be more of a player-centric coach instead of a me-centric coach. And I don't think he's capable of doing that. I think he's just going to kind of keep doing what he's doing with some minor tweaks and then just keep blaming the players. That's what I think is going to happen. But that's why I think it's up to Marcus Freeman to step in and say that no, this is what we're going to do. Right?
If there's ever a week to have that identity fix, right? Isn't it against UNLV, Brian? Because Notre Dame can't take any team for granted. We're talking about this, right? You lost to Marshall, you lost to Stanford. This isn't a give me, right? But UNLV may be the least talented team that you have on your schedule. If there was a week that you were going to kind of go outside your box and put some new stuff in and take chances, it's this week, isn't it? Like, it's this week, I think, right? It's not like you're playing Clemson this week where it's like, I'm not going to change my, structure. Well, not structurally. I'm not going to change my philosophy on how I'm going to attack things against the best team arguably on my schedule, right? Like outside of Ohio State probably. But this is a week where you could say, okay, if I had that realization that like, hey, there's an issue here and I'm probably the issue, then this is a week where you can add some of that stuff, where you can have a different point of emphasis. There's possibility. But I mean, again, I have to see it at this point, right? Like we're laying stuff out there that we want to see. Is it going to happen? I have no idea. Probably not. But if it does, that's a really positive sign. But if it doesn't, then we're going to be back on the show on Monday to talk about it. So regardless.
And you know what, though? But this is the kind of team with their talent that they could go out and roll UNLV and everything. Oh, and everything's good. And it's like the New Mexico game in 2019. We said it's fool's gold. That team sucks. You were running simple plays that should be 2-yard gains against other teams. And like Javon McKinley catches a 5-yard crossing route, just breaks literally like 13 tackles on the way to the end zone. You know who else he did that against the rest of the year? No one.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. And that's the whole point. They'll go out and roll somebody, but it won't matter because nothing changes philosophically, right? And that's the frustrating. And so that's why I say it's up to Marcus Freeman. He said something that really bothered me. He goes, I'm not an offensive guru. And I'm sorry. You were one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. Yeah. What film are you watching every week? Other teams' offenses. You can't be a defensive guru if you're not an offensive guru. There's a difference between teaching it and knowing it. And that's where his expertise needs to come into. Here's what you're doing, and here's why this is not even remotely a problem for defenses. And here's how you need to do it. I don't need him to go coach the quarterback's drop back technique. I don't need him to go coach the offensive lineman's reach technique on outside zone. I don't need him to teach kids how to run a hitch. But I know as a defensive coordinator, he can say, guys, when all you're doing is running here, that's easy for me to defend. What would make it harder for me to defend? Mixing it up. Give me some outside zone with this. Give me some buck sweep with this. Hey guys, you're making it super hard on my secondary that once they have because there's certain run keys that you have that once they see that, they fly down. That's what makes RPO so much more effective than play action at times, is because you aren't giving it away with your play action blocking technique, which is going to be different than your RPO technique, because your RPO technique is a run play for the offensive line. It's not a run look, it's a run play. They're blocking a run play. And so when the way teams are playing them, they're going to crash. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, there's 10 dudes in the box, even if there wasn't pre-snap. And so here's what you do to that. RPOs, this is what would hurt me as a defensive coordinator. If I was running this defense, this is what would kill me as a defensive coordinator. That's how you help. And then you say, get it done. No. I'm sorry. You thought this was a conversation. I apologize for giving you the wrong impression that this was a conversation with a back and forth. I'm the head coach. You're the offensive coordinator. My butt's on the line if this thing doesn't work. Your offense sucks. I'm not asking you to do this. I'm telling you to do this. Now go get it done. And if he doesn't, then demote him and put someone in there that will. Teams will do that. When you're a team like Notre Dame and your offensive coordinator doesn't listen to you, you do that. Now, I'm not saying he hasn't listened to him. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if he chooses not to, that's what you do. So please understand what I'm saying, okay? I'm not calling for them to demote Tommy Rees right now. I'm saying if the head coach goes in there and says, this is what you're going to do, this is why it would be super easy for me to defend you right now, and this is the changes that need to happen. And then if he doesn't do them, and this is who you're going to play, and you know what I mean? Like, this is who you're going to play. And if he doesn't do it, then you find somebody that will. It's that simple. And make it be known, this isn't a suggestion. This is not a suggestion. This is what I'm telling you you're going to do. And that's how it needs to be done. He's the head football coach. He doesn't need to be an offensive guru, but he knows what hurts defenses. And that's what troubled me about that comment, right? And I've said this before. Best coach I ever worked for, our offensive playbook was literally designed by our head coach, who was a defensive coordinator. You know what the design of the playbook was? Everything that teams did that he hated to defend was our offense. And that's why he took a program that was not any good and turned him into one of the best Division III programs for over a decade before he passed away. Almost 20 years before he passed away. You know what I mean? And so that's called, I may not be an offensive guru, but I know what kicks my butt as a defensive coach. And I know what I need to stop, and I know what's easy to stop and what's hard to stop. And that's what Coach Freeman needs to do.
I love
it. Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
I love the chess match. It just kind of to put it out there for a second, Brian. Like I always used to think of like when I would coach, like that was my same thought process, was like, I would hate defending that. Like that stinks, man. Like a 3x1 set with a tight end into the boundary. I would hate defending that. I am probably going to be a gap short backside, and that stinks. I don't like being a gap short, and it's not rocket science, to your point, right, Brian? Like it's like, you know, as I prepare a defense, what hurts me, what makes me uncomfortable. That's what we need to do. Like, that's just easy. Right. That's basic, man. I mean, to your point, I just wanted to add that in because as a person that has coached in the past, like that's how I always used to think about it. Like, man, that sucks. I don't want to defend that. That's not fun. That's not fun. So yeah.
Right. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. We don't have a lot of questions started right now. And honestly, we kind of got into a roll, so I wasn't able to go back and look through a bunch of the question mark questions. So if you put a question in there early and you really want it to be addressed, either super chat it or just put it in there, right? Just put it in there again, and then we'll get to it. It'll be a lot easier for us to kind of look down and find those if they're put back to the bottom than to go kind of up top and do it. And you know, it's kind of funny, and this kind of got to me, but to end it this way, Irish Blooded says, we need to rent a billboard by the stadium, just like we did for Weiss, showing Tommy in the booth in the caption, do your effing job. Honestly, that's exactly what Marcus Freeman, I don't believe in billboards. I hated it when they did that billboard with Brian Kelly a few years ago. I don't know about a billboard Charlie Weiss. I wasn't here then. I don't like the billboard idea, but I love where Irish Blooded's head is at right here. Mm-hmm. If I'm Marcus Freeman, I would literally walk in there and say all the things needed to say, and I would look at him and I would say exactly to him what he said to Drew Pine. If you can scream it at the quarterback, then I'm going to scream it to you. Do your effing job. Your job is to score points, not to bitch about the players not being good enough or all these other things. Do your effing job. You scored 14 points against freaking Stanford. Freaking Stanford. You scored 21 points against freaking Marshall. Do your effing job. If you can yell it to a quarterback, that I can yell it to you. Do your effing job.
And you also gifted Marshall a touchdown as well off of a pick six. So yes, to your point.
There you go. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to move on to the mailbag next. As we said, put those questions down below. But before we go, please, everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boardsonirishbreakdown.com. Obviously, subscribe to our CFB Nation channel. We are going to, so just so those of you listen, we are going to start taking some episodes that we have on CFB Nation and putting them on our feed at Irish Breakdown just to give you guys a sense of what that show is all about. We would love it if you would kind of start subscribing and look at that channel, start listen to that content. It's great football content. We're hoping to add some new shows here lately. We haven't had John Garcia on a lot because he had a baby, and he's been kind of dealing with a newborn. So I told John, do what you got to do. You know what I mean? Like, your lady needs you, your baby needs you. Do what you got to do. But he's going to start ramping up here again soon, and we'll get back to it. So, so definitely do all that, and thank you for being with us on this part of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So Ryan, it is mailbag time, Ryan, and so we're gonna get to it. As I said, if you have a question that you gave early in the show, either super chat it or just put it in. I'm not begging for super chats. I mean, we'll see it then, or just put it in there again, just as it is, and we'll try to get to it. So we're going to try to get to some of these comments and questions. We want to try to let some of the comments go too, Ryan, because I know there's a lot of people frustrated and want to get that stuff out. Connor Grant says, can we expect Tobias to get 30 plus 30, 30 more snaps going forward? Can we expect it? I don't expect it. It should happen. He only had 10 snaps on Saturday. Only played 10 snaps. Like,
I was surprised. I was surprised it was that many. I honestly, I was surprised that it was actually 10.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a good sign. I mean, Brian's. I commented on the fact that Tobias wasn't on the too deep again for the depth chart, and someone was like, that really doesn't matter. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, you're not technically wrong, but I haven't seen Tobias up until this point, and he's also not been on the depth chart enough, right? So until that changes, I just don't have any. I don't have any confidence that it will change, Connor. Like, I hope it will. It should. And I think clearly we saw just off of the 2 targets and 141-yard touchdown that Tobias deserves the opportunity. But until it happens, I'm not going to fully buy into it. So,
yeah. Next question. We have another super chat down here from Jacob Abel. The problem with Tommy always trying to trick opponents by doing the unexpected is the expected is normally expected because it works and makes sense. I mean, there's always a sense of you have to have that balance, right? I mean, and Jacob, I think I like what you're saying here, but I don't think that Tommy is trying to trick opponents by doing the unexpected. I think it's just dumb. I mean, I really think it's just overthinking it. Like this past week, were they trying to there's no way that Stanford's going to think we're going to just regurgitate the same game plan as last week. So let's do that. I mean, I don't think was what he's thinking. I just think he was like, well, this worked against BYU. Let's run it all against Stanford, which is just not what good coaches do. You have your offense, you have what you do, but then you tailor it to attack the other team's weaknesses and accenting your strengths by going at their weaknesses and areas where they're strong and you're maybe not, doing things to protect that part of it. And so I don't think that's what he's doing. But to your specific question, just from a football standpoint, there's always a need to, sort of do things that they're not expecting. Those are called tendency breakers, right? And you want to, or things that you keep another team honest, or to steal yards, right? You don't steal yards with things that they're expecting you to do unless they make a mistake. But there's things you do off of your base, off of what you do that maybe a team is expecting that you then can use to like they did a good job of that on Saturday. One of the better play calls on Saturday was a play where they ran that cross action off duo again, and that they'd been crashing all day, and he just pulled it. Mayer got free. How can Mayer get that free? Because that was a tendency breaker. That was something they did off a look that they'd been just hammering all game, and then you pull it and you throw it, and Mayer steals yards, right? Yep. That was a good call. My thing is that should have been earlier, like the touchdown to Tobias. I mean, where was that in the first quarter? Those are things where you're constantly waiting until what you were doing doesn't work and then adjusting to things that then do work a little bit. And then you're wondering, oh, he's worked. Okay. How about you do that at the beginning? So you always have to have that balance between expected and unexpected. But I mean, what I would call it is it's a tendency breaker, and it's stuff that we've talked about for sure that needs to be a part of it. So Jacob, I like what you're saying here. I just don't think it's that. I think he thinks that stuff's going to work. I really do. Yeah. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Hey guys, I got personal good news. Go Irish, go IB. So I didn't see, did he put something down there what was that personal good news? Because I'd love to hear it.
I'll go take a look.
Yeah.
Charlie, if you
So
as I'm looking for it, if you want to pop
yeah,
it into the chat, we would
I'd
love
love
to
to
hear
hear
the good
that, man.
news.
Yeah, absolutely. If you got personal good news, we'd love to share that with you if you're willing to share it with us. All right, we've got here from Demetrius Rex. Demetrius says, "Why does it feel like some players on the team are so blah and sluggish? Is this a culture problem on the offense? From a player's perspective, would you feel tight and uninspired in a scan offense?" I don't think it's uninspired. I think I think the tight comes from Tommy Rees's attitude and knowing that he's going to go off at any minute and yell and go off at any minute and without teaching, just screaming at you, which is something I've heard from plenty of sources the last couple of years, and especially this year as things have gone bad. But it's more so also that your opportunities are limited, and then the final piece, more so, Ryan, to me, is just uncertainty. I think a big problem with what's going on offense right now is uncertainty. They're not sure of what they're doing or how to do it, because it's so much more scheme driven than it is assignment. And that's the other thing. If you're going to play the way that Notre Dame is playing, your players have to be precise football players. Precise football players. And I think that's kind of been an issue for me. And so you've got to pick a lane. And I think it comes down to that. There's just not a lot of confidence. Number one, I know this for a fact. There's a lot of players on the team on offense, and I've heard this from a lot of people, that they don't think that they are believed in. And it's hard to have faith in someone. Like if I was constantly ripping Ryan and criticizing his work and just talking down to him and doing all those other type of things, he'd be like, man, like Brian doesn't. And then I wasn't, hey, Brian, let me do this. No, I got it. Hey, Brian, can I do it? No, I got it. No, I'll do it. I'll handle it. He'd be thinking, this guy does not like me. This guy has no faith in me. Like I need to be worried about whether or not I'm going to get fired here soon. Right. I mean, am I wrong? Would that not be how you would be taking all that? Because it's like, well, this dude doesn't believe in me. Right. But I can be, hey, Ryan, man, we need to do this, or, hey, I need you to do this. And I can say those things because in other conversations, I'm like, great job here. Love this. Hey, you're doing a good job. Can you help me out here? Can you take this show? Like Ryan knew what it meant the first time I said, hey, man, can you do a show for me? He knew what that meant because he knows I don't like giving up my baby very much. Like now, I mean, there's a show on Monday now that I'm ever really a part of. He knows what it took for me to give that up. Because you know what I mean? So then I can then say, hey man, like I didn't like this, or this needs to be better, or let's try this, something different, because he knows, dude, I think you're doing a great job. I got faith in you, but I think we can be better.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with football players. If you're just constantly, you suck, we have talent, we have limited talent, we don't have this, we don't have that. I'm like, well, this guy thinks we suck. And he's calling plays like he thinks we suck. So why should I go play for him? So I think there's a lot of that. There's a huge culture problem going on at Notre Dame right now. And Sean Davis and I are going to have a show about this week, where we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So today we just wanted to talk more scheme and X's and O's and those kind of things. But I think you're onto something.
Well, even on top of the even if I can, Brian, even on top of the culture, I mean, going back to that question for a second, right? It's also the simple fact of like, hey, if I don't 100% understand what my role is here, I don't understand what my responsibility is, I don't understand what the coach's goals for me in this offense are, then you're going to be a little confused, right? And I think confusion also makes it look like you're a little blah, like you're a little, just kind of teetering around because you just don't have any confidence in what you're being asked to do. And I know we're focused on offense today, but that goes to the defensive side of the football. Like there's some players on the defensive side where I just think that they don't really understand what their responsibility is, if I'm being honest. Like that's just what it is. So yeah, I think there's a lot of it though, man. There's a lot of layers to it, unfortunately. And I agree. There's definitely a culture issue at this point with a lot of the players. So.
Yep. All right, let's get to the next one here. This is from Coach Koch, where I really, really think the main issue is the quarterback coaching. Every recent quarterback, Book, Malik, Wimbush, Kaiser, all regressed as they played. Cone didn't, but Hess, but he's not coached early. He wasn't coached early on by Notre Dame. I agree with that, but part of that I'm not putting on Tommy Rees. I'm not putting Malik Zaire and Brandon Wimbush and Deshaun Kaiser on Tommy Rees because he wasn't here for them. Well, Wimbush to a degree, but I've said this before. I think Wimbush was kind of wrecked before Tommy Rees got a hold of him. I don't blame Tommy for that. I blame Mike Sanford for that. So I mean, three of those quarterbacks I can't really blame on Tommy Rees.
Yeah.
So, but I think Tommy Rees learned from the guy who is responsible for that, and that's my issue, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's part. I mean, everybody's banging on Drew Pine. Look, Drew Pine has the talent to be a much better player than he was on Saturday. We saw him do it 2 weeks before against against BYU North Carolina. We've seen him make some of those throws. We've seen him play really good football. If Drew Pine simply would have played the same way he did against North Carolina and BYU, Notre Dame is 4-2 right now, and we're having a different conversation, right? But he wasn't put in the same position against Stanford that he was put in some of those other games. He wasn't helped in the way he needs to. And now there's things Drew's got to do better. I'm not blaming Tommy Rees for Drew missing Braden Lindsey for a touchdown. I'm not blaming that on him. There's no coaching thing that's going to cause a guy to miss that bad. That's a confidence thing. That's a rushing his technique thing and all that. I'm not putting that on Tommy Rees. There's a lot of other things, however, the reads and not in the late and the timing. I'm putting that on Tommy Rees because of how we've seen this offense evolve over in recent weeks. So, I want to make sure I'm careful that I'm not just putting everything on Tommy Rees' shoulders. Every single time there's an incompletion, it's the coach. Like there's times my guys made mistakes when I was a coach, and I'm pretty sure like, hey, that's not on me. He's got to make that play because we worked on this all day. Everybody else is making it. He's made that before. My man, you gotta make that play. I can't make it for you, right?
Well, because the thing is, right, Brian, that when you put a player in a position to make the play and they don't make it, that's not a coaching issue, right? What we're saying is we don't think that they're being put into the best position to make a play, right? Like that's the difference, right? As long as a coach is putting a guy in a position to make a play that they can make, that's all they can do. From there, it's about the players. But I just don't think that all the players, especially offensively, are put into the best position for them to capitalize on the talent they have and to make a play that they can make. I think that's where it is right now.
Yep, agree completely. I want to bring this up. Mark Brown, I would love it if you would bring this. And we're not going to address this today because it's not really in line with what we're trying to talk about today. But when Sean Davis and I do a show later this week together, please bring this comment back because it would be a great time to address it at that point in time. All right, so here we go. Market wise. I think it's market wise, maybe is what that's meant to say. Guys, the problem is you're asking for immediate change to be made by a guy running the offense who already thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and Tommy Rees won't self-evaluate, Ryan, and that's the danger. And that's why, honestly, I can't control what Tommy Rees does. And I've said this to players. I say this to parents. I've said this to, recruits. I've said this my whole life as a coach, right? Hey, you can't control what I do. You can't control what the head coach does. You can't control what the quarterback does. You can't control that the quarterback's going to throw you the ball. So stop complaining about it. You do your job. You do it well. You do it as well as you can, right? And then let the rest of the stuff kind of take care of itself, right? Focus on doing your job. And so, to me, all we can do is focus on saying this is what needs to happen. I can't control what Tommy Rees does. I can't control what Marcus Freeman does. I can't control what any of the players do or anybody else does. I can't control that, right? So I'm not just going to sit back and throw my hands up and say, well, I may be, spitting into the wind here. Don't care because this is right. And yes, that may sound arrogant, but I'm just telling you, this will work because what we've seen isn't working and the players aren't that bad. Even if you buy the argument they don't have great talent, it ain't 23 points a game bad.
No.
It's not. I keep saying ain't today. That's how pissed off I am. My grammar's just flying out the window. But it's not that the talent's not that bad. No. You say, okay, well, maybe they're only 30 points. But if they're averaging 30 points a game right now, they're 5-1. Right? Because and maybe you lose to Ohio State 21-16 instead of 21-10. You're 5-1 right now if you're a 30-point per game offense. That's how bad this is. 23 points a game after 6 games, right? I mean, it's not even like you're playing good defenses. You're not. No. You're not even playing good defenses. I mean, Marshall ranks 16th in the country in scoring defense, and Ohio State ranks 10th, right? North Carolina, let's see here. North Carolina ranks NC State, sorry. North Carolina ranks 110th. BYU ranks 99th. You didn't even get here's the thing. You scored under BYU scoring average. They're giving up 30 points a game. Stanford ranks 92nd at 29.7 points per game. And that's after they held Notre Dame to 14 points. and Cal ranks 34th in scoring. You're not playing good defenses to the point where you should be scoring 23 points a game. No. You've played 3 teams that rank 92nd or worse in scoring defense, and you went under their scoring average in 2 of the 3 games. One of them by over double. You scored 14 points against a team that coming into that game was scoring over 30 points a game. You're still over double now after that game because they're at 29.7. You scored 14 points. 14 points. It's not working. And so just keep doing what you're doing and wait to get better players. Nah, bro. That's not going to fly. That's not going to fly. Because you are underachieving with what you have now. Why should I have you around to underachieve with better players? So a team that should be scoring 40 can score 30? No, it needs to happen. So do I have faith that he's going to do it? No, I don't. I have zero faith right now that he's going to make the changes. I hope he proves me wrong. I do. And I'll be the first one standing up cheering for him if he does.
Yep.
I will. But I have no faith that he's going to do it right now. None. I have no faith that he's going to look in the mirror. That's the thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
Because I was just going to say, Brian, because you're not here just to like crap on him, right? Like you're here because you want what's best for the Notre Dame program. Like that's where it comes to. You know what I mean? Like I know that we would both be 100% fine if he flips it around and Tommy Rees is what's best for the Notre Dame program. I would love that because that means you don't have to make a change. You don't have to compromise.
Great story. I don't want to fire him and then risk losing recruits and all that other kind of stuff. That's not good for me. That's not good for Notre Dame. That's not good for anybody. I've been in that situation. I don't want anybody to get fired. That's why I don't advocate for guys to get fired. But it's also my job to point out and give honest opinion. I would much rather be sitting here talking about, hey, remember how I told you all that Tommy Rees was going to be that guy before the year? I'm right. I was right. You think I like sitting there and saying, hey, I was flat out wrong on the dude. Flat out wrong. I don't like saying that. And people say, well, hey, it takes a big, it doesn't take a big man to admit you're wrong. That's just what you should do. I don't like doing it though. I hate admitting I'm wrong. I'm not a fan
like being
of it.
right. I like being right. Exactly.
But I was wrong on this one. I wish I wasn't, but I was. And I hope go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just going to say, Brian, but you know what that says about you, right? To this comment about the smartest guy in the room, the real smart people self-evaluate and can admit when they have to make a change. Like that's the biggest thing, right?
That's on me. That's on me. 100%. Yes. I've talked to coaches in Notre Dame in the past. Man, look, dude, I was such a stupid call. I can't believe I made that call. Like I've had them say that to me. I remember one time, I'm trying to remember can't say it because they'll give it away. But I had a coach call me after a game, and he's like, dude, we got so lucky. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I called the dumbest. And he was like, he just like made a bad call on a play like late in the game, but his guys executed it and it worked out. He's like, and he was praising his kids, right? Like, look, I made such a dumb call. But, somebody did this, and it was a great block or something like that, and it was a big play. And it's just like, you're getting the polar opposite now, right? Where it's just like, it's always them, it's always them, it's always them. If Tommy Rees is willing to look in the mirror and own this game, 100% in every hey, they're not making plays, that's on me. They're not coaching up this, that's on me. That's what the great ones do, right? That's what great coaches do. That's what people who believe in building up young people in every capacity do. They look in the mirror and say, you know what? I've been acting like an idiot in practice. I have been. These game plans I'm putting together, I thought they were going to work. They didn't. Okay. So I gotta rethink. If this was my go-to, then I gotta rethink this. I didn't think this kid was ready. Kid showed me he's ready. Let's give him a shot. This is on me, right? Mm-hmm. That's what called being a man is. You look in the mirror when things aren't going your way. You don't blame the teenager. You don't blame the kid playing for free. You say, this is on me. This is why they paid me what they're paying me. This is on me, right? If something happens bad at Irish breakdown, I say, hey, that's not my fault, man. Ryan's the one that screwed that up. That's on me. I proofed it. If it went out wrong and there was a spelling error, that's on me. That's on me, right? And so there's not enough accountability there. And that's why I said earlier, that's why Coach Freeman needs to walk in there and have a come-to-Jesus moment with him and remind him this is not a suggestion, right? Now, hopefully, Coach Rees has already had that conversation with himself before Marcus Freeman says a word.
Yes.
And then it's just like, yeah, Coach, I got you. No, definitely. I feel the same way. Here's what I was. But when Coach Freeman gave it away, Coach Freeman gave it away, and I don't think he meant to do this, but Coach Freeman gave it away on his Monday press conference. And I haven't said this publicly, but I'm going to say it now. He said something in the post-game or the Monday press conference where he said, I feel better about the game plan now after sitting down with the offensive staff and watching film than I did before. So what that tells me, Ryan, you've been in those meeting rooms. That tells me Tommy Rees pointed out all the mistakes the players made and why that was the problem and not the game plan or the play calling. That's how that happened. Because he said he sat down with the offensive staff. And I don't think he meant it how I took it, but there's no other way. It can't be anything else. The fact that you had to convince your head coach that the game plan worked, it didn't work because they didn't execute it. Who's responsible for execution? You are. You are. And I've said this before. If it's happening to one player, then that's on the player. But when it's happening across the board, that's on you as a coach. Because you're the one not teaching them the right way. You're the one not doing enough during the week of practice to make them comfortable when things don't go the way you expect them to go to on a game. That's on you. And the fact that Coach Freeman said that, and again, I don't think he meant it that way, but the fact that he said that, Ryan, made me say, you didn't sit down and say, dude, I effed this up. This just was not it. It was here, but Drew screwed up that. Drew missed this. Drew missed that. Look, this was open. That was open. Yeah, so you should have won 31-16. You should have scored 50 on that team because they suck. Yep. They suck. And I know that's not professional, and I know that's emotional, but it's also true. And I'm saying it for effect because Stanford is awful on defense. Awful. So, Ryan, it's just let me give you this stat. The last time that Stanford gave up that few points in a game against an FBS team was at the beginning of the 2019 season against a Northwestern team that went 3-9 and averaged 16 points a game. That's the last time Stanford gave up as few points as what Notre Dame scored on Saturday.
Yep.
That's embarrassing.
And you can even put it to this season, man. I said this on the post-game show, right? Like, Notre Dame scored 4 more points than Colgate scored against Stanford.
Yep. That's embarrassing. And don't tell me it's talent. The talent may make you not be. Let's just say the talent's not good. Okay, so you don't score 50 on them. You can't score 20, 24,
and even if you are the talent is there's a lack of talent person. Are you telling me that it's such a lack of talent that they're only 4 points better than Colgate? Is that what you're saying? Notre Dame's 4 points better than Colgate? That's what that's okay. All right. Got it.
Yep. It's just, but see, that was the attitude that there existed before with the previous coach. And remember last week how we talked about how Colgate was not a very good rushing team and they went for 159 yards. Notre Dame only went for 150. Only rushed for 150 yards against them. That's it. In the last 2 seasons, the only team to rush for fewer yards than Notre Dame was Washington State last year, a team that just doesn't run. Well, they just don't run. And they did that because they threw for 400-some yards on them.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's ridiculous. Negative Kid asked, Brian, how much would you charge Rees to be his personal offensive consultant? Not a dime. I would do it for free. It's not going to happen, but I would do it for free. Irish Blooded, not to make this the Bash Tommy hour, but with what you've heard from Marcus Freeman so far, what do you realistically think he will do moving forward to fix the issues? And we kind of addressed this a little bit earlier. I don't think he's going to do anything to fix it. Not actually fix it. He's going to put some Band-Aids on things. Well, I'm going to run this offense anyway, so I'll put this kid in here more because he does what I want him to do. And we'll see stuff like that, which will make them a little bit better. And they'll have some games. Look, they're going to have some games like the North Carolina game where they're going to come out and look like gangbusters. They need to put a great game plan together, and we'll praise him when he does that. And then the next week we'll come out and see the same crap over again. So it'll be continued up and down. And, I have no confidence he will. I truly hope that I'm wrong. I truly hope that Coach Reese looks in the mirror and says, you know what, dude, I dropped the ball in this one. I thought I could do this, and this, and I screwed up. I didn't listen to this person enough. I blame this kid. I acted like a jerk off in practice. I'm being a prick. I got to change, right? Because this is on me, right? That's what winners do. That's what the great ones do. That's what guys that I wouldn't want my kid to play for do, right? I don't have a kid, so it's easier for me to say, but you get the point that I'm making, right? And I just don't have confidence he's going to do it, because if he was, it should have happened before the Stanford game. But hopefully, it was bad enough that he has no choice but to do that. I pray he does. I do, because I like Tommy Reese. I do. I would love for it to work out. I do. And not just so I can say I was right, because nothing he can do moving forward makes me say, see, I was right. Look what they did in the last half of the year when the season was over with. Nope, doesn't do it. It was wrong. There's nothing that can be done now to salvage this season. But what you can do is you can salvage your reputation. You can regain the trust in the players in you, and you can become a better man and a better coach. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
Bill Walsh says, throw to Tyree out of the backfield, stop the 12-13 personnel runs that aren't working, short stuff to Styles, run outside some, don't always key on Mayer, throw to Merriweather, play the young tight ends. All great stuff, Bill. And I think the first one is insane to me. Why did he stop throwing the ball to Chris Tyree in the pass game? I mean, okay, so he dropped the pass on a screen. Okay, it happens. Go back to him.
Did the running backs catch a pass on Saturday?
Yes, on a 3rd and 18, they threw an angle route.
The angle. You're right.
3rd and 18.
You're right.
Yes.
You're right.
Yes.
You're right. Yep.
But yeah, there was nothing other than that designed for them, really. Like, I'm trying to remember what game I was watching. Was it the Alabama game? I was watching a game where a receiver just dropped a clear open throw. And the
probably Alabama.
It might have been that game. And I think it might. I'm trying to remember what game it was. But it was a game I watched this week, and a kid drops a ball. And on the very next play, they went right back to him and got him a ball and went for like 30 yards. Whereas at Notre Dame, if a kid drops a ball whose name isn't Michael Mayer, you're not getting another throw for the next 3 games.
Might be off the field the next play.
Yeah, right. And you wonder why kids play tight. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I don't get benched. Like, if Tommy Reese makes a bad call, Freeman doesn't get hey, Tommy, I'm benching you for this next series. Jared, pick up the thing and you're calling plays. It doesn't happen to the coaches, right? Because mistakes happen. Let's correct it and move on. And that's what good coaches do. Man, you got to make that play. You know what I mean? Do your job, but then you give the kid a chance to do his job on the very next play. That tells the kid, hey, I still believe in you. Do your job, right? But you don't get that in Notre Dame. You really don't get that in Notre Dame. And that's why you see kids play tight the way that they do on both sides of the ball. Because even defensively, there's a clear disconnect between what Al Golden is doing and what the players are executing compared to how it was under Marcus Freeman and how it was under Clark Lee. And I don't know what it is. Maybe he doesn't have faith in them. They don't have faith in him, or they're not understanding what he's teaching. But a lot of dudes that we've seen play really good football aren't playing good football. And that speaks to me a much bigger problem. Again, we're not talking hypothetical talent. All the stuff we're complaining about is about guys doing things that we have seen them do, with one exception, Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey, those 2 kids, right? But Foskey, Adam Yolas, Kaiser, Bertrand, Marist, Brandon Joseph, Cam Hart, Lorenzo Styles, Braden Lindsay, Chris Tyree, Logan Diggs, Audric Estime. These are all things we have seen these kids do in a college uniform. This isn't, gee, I think Tobias can do this. And then what happened when he did it, though? When he was given that chance? Made a play.
Yep.
Made a play. So the fact that many players have regressed is not a player problem. It's a coaching problem. If only Foskey regressed, you could say, hey, look, maybe he's worried about the NFL, whatever. You could say something like that. But when it's across the board, it's not a player problem. And then when I hear Coach Freeman say in this press conference, hey, it says the things he says, I can live with it as long as I see things change. The reason I'm starting to get frustrated with Coach Freeman, someone who I greatly respect and admire, I hope he succeeds. He's a good man. There's nothing I want more than to see Marcus Freeman succeed. But when I hear him say those things, you can chalk it up to he has his coach's backs. And I respect that. But then when you see nothing change, you start asking yourself, maybe he actually believes that. And that's why the things from this weekend and from yesterday were so disconcerting, is because it's like, because nothing's changed, I'm starting to think he actually believes that. And he's been convinced it's the players, not us. And that concerns me in a very big way. Beefeater, a.k.a. Toe Jam, says, Brian, our running plays are so slow to develop. A buck sweep would be tracked down by the end on every attempt. A, no, it wouldn't. B, if a defensive end was tracking it down that way, there's so many things you can do to counter that to make it to where he doesn't do that. I mean, if he's running that hard, then you just have Drew Pine keep it, and he will run for 10 yards before anyone knows he has the football. Right? Throw a bubble screen. Run a reverse. If a backside end is crashing that, and this is what was so dumb about the reverse they ran on Saturday. It was not off of anything they do. It was so telegraphed. You put 3 tight ends and a receiver into the boundary, and there was nobody backside the left tackle. You've never run a play out of that. And then you're like, you run a reverse. You're like, well, duh, of course that was coming, right? Reverses are at their best when they come off of what you're doing. Like and I've seen Tommy do this. That's what's so frustrating. Like, they ran a reverse against Georgia Tech in 2020. I was actually at that game, Ryan, and it was like right in front of me. And they ran like an off tackle, like an outside stretch play to Kyron Williams, and the backside safety didn't move. He just stood there. So on the very next play, they ran that exact same look and ran Chris Tyree. And on that play, they did a reverse motion with Chris Tyree, and they ignored him. So what they did on the very next plays, they ran that same exact play, but instead they gave the ball to Chris Tyree, and he ran around for 25 yards. That's good coaching. That's good coaching, right? We're not seeing that. We're seeing this weirdly scripted stuff that's like, okay, we're putting a reverse in off of a look we haven't run all game, and then we're shocked that it doesn't work. That's bad coaching, right? A reverse works because we're killing them with our buck sweep, and that end is crashing. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to fake that buck sweep and, do a little quick handoff to the guy on a jet sweep, and then that defensive end's never going to crash again, right? Yeah. Some plays are meant to be slow developing, though, too. And you have counters for those kind of things, right? Including cross action sometimes if a guy's doing that to protect against it out of 12 personnel or something. So I understand what you're saying. I just don't agree with the premise or the result. Ryan, you have anything to say about that?
No, I mean, and we've seen a lot of duo the last couple of weeks. Duo is not a slow developing play. Like, it's a downhill run. Like, I just don't agree either.
Yep. Tyler Bedwell says, I'm a little behind here on podcast time, but I am so frustrated to hear Pine is still developing. He's a third-year guy. Why is he still developing and looking like a freshman? He should be ready. Well, I mean, he didn't look like that against North Carolina and BYU, and that's the whole point, right? Like, let's not forget last week we were asked, in 2 different shows, do you think Drew Pine has done enough to be basically handed the starting job for next year? That's what we were told last week because of how he played the 2 previous weeks. So let's try to have a little bit of big picture view here. And that's why I get so frustrated with the kind of the ripping of Drew Pine, right? Yep. Because it's like a week ago, we were having a completely different conversation about him. And so Tyler, but to answer your question, there's a difference between not being ready and being inexperienced. Because there's some things that you just can't prepare a kid for until he sees it in the game. And first-year starters are going to have up and down performances. That's going to happen. What happened here, however, is when he had a bad performance, everybody blamed him for it and not anyone else. Not the coach, that's my problem, right? And so I'm more than willing to criticize Drew Pine because nothing Marcus Freeman said about Drew Pine yesterday was wrong. My only concern is, why are you only saying it about Drew Pine and not some of the stupid play calls that we saw or the terrible game plan that we saw the rest of the game? That's my thing. Does that make sense? So he's playing like a kid who only has 4 starts. There's a reason people value experience so much at that position, because experience means I have seen this happen and I know what to do when it happens. Or I have been down this road before. I've had my struggles. Now I know how to get myself out of it, right? Drew really couldn't get himself out of his struggles before. That happens with inexperienced quarterbacks. That's a learning lesson. And hopefully he doesn't make that mistake again. And so That's what I mean by that, Tyler, is yes, he's in his third year, but he's never been put on the situation in 3 years where he had to be the guy and all that comes with it, all the press conferences, all the meetings, all the people seeking interviews, all this kind of stuff. He that's new to him. And it's going to result at times in a guy, especially a guy who can't see, because Drew can't make up for mistakes with just God-given ability. Like Trevor Lawrence could make a bad read. Didn't matter. Because he just was so good, he could still fit the ball in between three guys, right? Like Drew Pine can't get away with that. And so lack of experience impacts a kid like him more than it would Trevor Lawrence or a Justin Fields or guys that are just incredibly physically gifted. John Elway could make a dumb read as a quarterback and throw it in between four guys and complete it on 3rd and 19 because he just threw it so dang hard there was nothing you could do about it. But Drew Pine can't do that.
Yep.
And so that's why the inexperience is going to cause a little bit of you just kind of hope it's like this. That's what you hope it's like for a young kid, as opposed to you're staying in the same place, but it's like this, right? And so I understand what you're saying, Tyler. Just in this instance, I don't think he played like a freshman all year. He played like one against Stanford. He didn't play one like against North Carolina or BYU. And I think that's the frustrating thing.
It's been like a roller coaster with Drew Pine too, man. Like it's been a roll. I mean, this is why I said last week when we were talking about that, right? Like again, to your point, like multiple people are like, Drew Pine should be the starter going into next year, and whoever comes in should be the players that are trying to battle for taking his starting spot. And it's just like, guys, like let's enjoy the good because there's going to be some bads at points, right? Like that's why we're not super hyperbolic one way or the other. The truth is usually somewhere in between. So, like, yeah, did Drew Pine have a bad game? For sure. But like the context is also like, was he put in the best position? We don't think so. Is he still an inexperienced quarterback? Yes, he is. And to your point, Brian, like there are some things that you're not going to be able to make up for that margin for error with a Drew Pine. Like he has to be a kid that's confident. He has to be a kid that is on time. He's got to be a kid that understands what he's seeing. Like those things have to be there for him. So let's not be super hyperbolic. And let's not be hyperbolic right now either, right? Drew had a bad game. Let's hope he plays better next week. That's all it comes down to. He was bad last game.
If you bench a quarterback every time they have a bad game, eventually you're going to run out of quarterbacks. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I don't care who your quarterbacks are.
Yep.
I don't care.
And if you do that, Josh Allen was bad as a rookie in Buffalo, and now 3 years later, he's arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. And you had
fans and media people saying, he's going to be a bust. He's going to be a bust. He's going to suck. And as your point, I mean, would you say he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now? He's at least in the conversation.
I still think it's Mahomes, but he's in the conversation.
He's in the conversation, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
And I'm gonna tell you what, I don't watch NFL. I don't care to watch NFL, but I'm going to be honest with you. I have a hard time saying no every time that those two guys are matched up against each other. I'm not, because I do watch playoff football, and I watch sometimes, and I watched the playoffs last year, and that game between those two guys in the playoffs last year was just unreal. I mean, because they're great players and they're warriors, man. Like they battle, right? They
do stuff too where it's just like that should not be possible. Like they just have two of the best arms ever. Right. You're just like that should not be physically possible, but it is.
So, they're tough guys. They'll take hits. They'll and they're fun to watch. They are, and it makes me. And there's such a different dichotomy between the last great quarterback battle of Manning and Brady, who were just such. They were similar in style, but it was a different style. Like these guys are just like this is more like NBA. Like in the NBA, you're just watching like Bird go against Dominique in the place. There's two great players just making stupid plays. You're just like these, or Bird versus Jordan or Bird versus Magic. We're just like, this is just insanity. Like these guys are just doing things that nobody on the planet can do. Where Peyton and Tom were more like it was up here.
Cerebral,
with Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes, it's just like it's like I've said this. Pat Mahomes is the closest thing I've ever seen to a quarterback who plays like John Elway, and then Josh Allen came along, and he's kind of that way too. So for me, you understand why I love that style of play.
Oh yeah,
but yes, you got to give a kid time, and there's no amount of time in the system that can overcome the experience that you get from actually playing on Saturdays. And a perfect example for me, Ryan, would be Stetson Bennett. I mean, Stetson Bennett in 2020 was not good. I mean,
Yep.
not good.
Was not.
You
Was
know,
not.
he started several games, and he had, let's see, when he was starting early, he had 7 touchdowns and 8 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in 6 games, and completed 55.5% of his passes, went 5 of 16 with a pick against Florida, went 18 of 40 against Alabama. You know, he wasn't very good. 3 interceptions against Bama, 2 interceptions against 9 of 13 with 2 picks and a 14-3 win over Kentucky. It wasn't very good. And then lo and behold, he comes out last year, and he's okay early, but the more and more he played, the better and better he got. And all of a sudden was a better player. Now, was part of that talent around him? Sure, but he had talent around him in 2020 as well.
Sure.
Right? He got experience. He knew, hey, I can't do that, or hey, I can do this, or hey, this guy can do that. And he just got better and better and better. And I think that's a good comparison for Drew Pine, because if Stetson Bennett can be a successful college quarterback, why can't Drew Pine? If put in the right situation. What Todd Monken didn't do last year is ask Stetson Bennett to put the team on his shoulders and will us to victory. He didn't do that. Right? He said, hey, we're going to put the pieces in place to maximize what Stetson can do. Hey, he doesn't have a big arm. Let's design some stuff to get James Cook open on a wheel route, because he can make that throw. Right? And it was called good coaching. And that's what we're missing with Drew Pine, in my opinion. Market Y says the reason this ish drives us crazy is that we see other teams do this stuff consistently and effectively, and we flip on our TVs for our games, and the offense is mainly ineffective. Borefest. And that's a point that we were making earlier, Ryan, I mean, it's not even something like if I was sitting there saying, well, Bama does this and Ohio State does this, and why can't Notre Dame do that? That would be like, hey, dude, they don't have the players for that. Fair. You're telling me that Notre Dame doesn't have the players that Stanford has? Because I saw Stanford doing that stuff. I saw them doing shovel passes to Casey Filkins. You're telling me Chris Tyree can't execute a shovel pass? You're telling me Logan Diggs can't execute a shovel pass? You're telling me that Lorenzo Styles can't do a look screen? I know he can, because I saw him do it last year.
Yep.
Multiple times against good teams.
It happens.
You know?
It happens almost every year where there's a new OC or a new head coach in a spot, and then all of a sudden things look completely different. I mean, think about TCU, Brian. How bad offensively was TCU last year? And then they get a coach that comes in there and is like, hey, Max Duggan, I'm going to ask you to do what you do well after Chandler Morris gets hurt. I'm going to ask Kendre Miller to do what he does well. I'm going to ask Quentin Johnson to do what he does well, Tay Barber, all these dudes. And all of a sudden, TCU's got one of the best offenses in college football. Is that a mistake? No, it's coaching. Right. It's coaching. Putting talent in good situations.
Let's back up your point too, Ryan.
Yeah.
Who's the transfer that has been the big reason for their success this year on offense?
For TCU?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a transfer? Let me think.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
These are the same dude you had. That was a trick question. These are the same dude lost a transfer. He transferred out. That's my point. They scored 28.7 points per game last year in the Big 12. They're scoring 45.8 per game now. Their lowest scoring output of the season was 38 points at Kansas and at Colorado. They've scored at least 38 points a game. They're scoring 45.8 points a game with the same freaking dudes they had last year. I made this point about LSU. I got into an argument one time with somebody, and they're like, well, yeah, but Notre Dame doesn't have LSU's players. LSU had a first-round number 1 draft pick. I said, but did you think any of those guys were that good in 2019 or 2018 when they were scoring 31 points a game? He's like, that's a good point. You know, now I'm not saying that there's a Jamar Chase on their team and they're just not using him. And there's also a Justin Jefferson on the team and they're just not using. I think there's a Justin Jefferson on the team and they're finally using him and he's playing well. But that's not the point, because we're not asking you to score 50 points a game. We're asking you to score 30 at this point in time. You know, and so you see it all the time. We saw it in 2017 or 2016 to 2017. You know, Notre Dame couldn't get out of their own shadow in 2011. Next year, team with a completely different team, same players, same dudes, right? And so, to me, I'm just tired of this excuse about the players, because I think your point was great. You bring in a new coach, new offensive coordinator, same dudes, same dudes.
Yep.
You know, same guys. TCU. This is what TCU's done on offense in the years before. Since 2016, 31 points a game, 33.6, 23.5, 30.3, 30.8, 28.7, 45.8. right? I mean, and you've beaten 3 teams that were ranked at the moment you beat them. And last week, TCU, Ryan, they didn't look great early on against Oklahoma State. They kept at it. They kept attacking. They kept giving their players opportunities to make plays, and they did it. And by the way, Max Duggan would have come to Notre Dame if they'd have taken him. So another example of he liked Notre Dame. They recruited him. They decided to go a different direction. And so another example of a kid. So you can't say, well, they can't get those kind of players. I'm sorry.
Was that the Brendan Clark class? What class was that?
What's that? He was a 2019 kid. They took Cade McNamara over him, and then Brendan Clark over him.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. You chose Cade McNamara, by the way. So that's my whole point, Ryan, is you're telling me that Max Duggan, who did not start the season, who got beat out by Chandler Morris, that to your point, because Chandler Morris got hurt in the first game, correct?
Yep.
You got beat out by Chandler Morris, and who started his career at Oklahoma, transferred. Chandler Morris is a 6 foot, 195-pound quarterback. Beat out Max Duggan, who's a returning starter, right? So your backup quarterback who has never thrown more. Here's Max Duggan's stats: 15 touchdowns, 10 picks, 10-4, 16-6 in 10 games last year. Gets beat out, comes out this year. He's got 16 touchdowns and 1 pick. Now, part of that is back to Tyler's question, which is experience. Experience helps.
Yep.
But from a talent standpoint, you're going to tell me that Max Duggan has a significantly better arm than Drew Pine? You're going to try and tell me that? Like, you're going to tell me that TCU has just a mess of NFL players running on the field and Notre Dame doesn't? Right? Stop. You're going to watch their offensive line and Notre Dame's offensive line and tell me it's better? You're going to watch their running backs and Notre Dame's running backs tell me that they're better?
TCU's offensive line is very bad, and they're still doing what they're doing with it, which is pretty bizarre. So, yeah.
Yep. So, stop blaming everybody else. Look in the freaking mirror, because that problem is not the players. I'll say it again. The problem is 2 coordinators that are more concerned with showing everyone else how smart they are instead of being what real college coaches are, which is player-centric. That's what Marcus Freeman was. That's what he needs to get back. He needs to make sure his coaches are doing it the way he did it, which was it's about the dudes. It's about the kids. Because we saw Freeman try to fit guys into a certain off defense last year, and as he learned the players, we saw them evolve. Less of Foskey dropping into coverage, less of Foskey off the line. Right? We saw him being used more and more and more the way he was capable because he got more used to the players. We're not saying that with this team. Jay Clamp and Investments with a super chat. Brian and or Ryan, do you think Coach Freeman has the power to fire or move on from Tommy? I fear that Tommy and Bill Reese are very powerful tandem behind the scenes. That's a concern I have. I won't say that I have the answer to that because I don't know the answer to that. I can only give you my opinion and the opinion I have based on some people I talk to. I am concerned that I don't know if he does. I have doubts that he does. And I also don't know if he thinks he can. Like, that's the only way I can explain the comments he makes. It's like, is there like a fear there? You don't want to piss off the Reeses and all their allies? This is one of the reasons I've said in the season, every vestige of the Brian Kelly era needs to be gone. You know what I mean? As much of it as possible. And so I don't know if Marcus Freeman has the power to do that. I really don't. And what I mean by that is not that I don't think he does. I don't know. I can only give you my opinion. And I always want to make sure here at Irish Breakdown that we're very clear with you of telling you what we are hearing, what we know, and what we think. That is 100% my opinion based on what I see, what I hear, whatever. It's just me connecting certain dots. No one has told me he can't fire him. Nobody's told me that. I haven't asked. Well, I have asked, but people don't know. And, rightfully so, not engaging in that conversation. But so I don't have an answer to that, but I have my doubts, Ryan. I have my doubts. Super chat from Tyler Evans. Why can't we stop teams on third down? Ryan, I'll let you have this one. I've been talking a lot here lately, and this is a defensive question. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you see teams that struggle on third down, or you see teams that struggle in those situations where you're in prevent at the end of games, I think that there's complacency, right? Like, I think that there is just a push towards not messing up, right? And then you stop being who you are. You lose your identity that got them into that third down position or into that bad situation. So I think that most teams, Brian, like in my opinion, the third down and the prevents flaws that they have is that they get away from their style, man. Like, stick to what you are. The teams that get into that vanilla understanding of like, hey, we can't make a mistake. Just get back. We'll run the picket fence. We're not letting anything behind us. All that good stuff. Those are the teams that get complacent and they make mistakes because you're asking your team now to completely flip what made them successful on the previous two downs. And then you're doing something that is just not what their style indicates, right? So I think that there's just a lack of aggressiveness in those situations at times. I think there's always going to be some lack of players just not making plays, right? In the big money downs. But I think more than anything, you're getting away from your identity and you're just being too complacent. You're sitting back. You're trying to be too cute. Just stay with what you are, man. Play your defense, play the way you do usually, and you'll usually be successful. So I think it's just a lack of identity in those situations, if I'm being honest.
Sean Kelly asks, and that was a good question. I appreciate that and a very good answer, Ryan. Sean Kelly says, players not showing up ready to play isn't the player's fault at all. It's a coaching problem, and coaching starts at the top. I'm going to somewhat disagree with this.
It can be both.
The coach ultimately is accountable. At the end of the day, however, the message I'll tell every single player, and I believe this is true of me, I believe this is true of everybody, this is a lesson I've had to learn in my life, is I remember I went through something really crappy when I was a player, and I got benched, and it wasn't my fault. And it was a situation where the new coordinator came in. His son was the quarterback's coach. They brought in a freshman, that they wanted to work with. And so they put me in a lot of bad positions to fail. And, and it just kind of how it went, right? And so I got screwed, I felt. And, the message that my dad told me is, he goes, yeah, you did get screwed. And it's not your fault. But how you respond to it, that's 100% on you. If you respond poorly, if you quit the team, if you do this, if you do that, that's not about them anymore, right? That's about you. And I don't remember if I definitely wanted to quit, but I definitely remember having conversations where my dad told me what quitting would mean. That would mean, that's not about them. Quitting is about you, right? That's about, because I was like, look, I'm screwed. I'm just going to finish my degree. I'm going to get into coaching and all that kind of stuff. And so my dad was like, look, you can't control whether they're going to start you or play you or respect you. So, so I said, okay, fine. I'll work with the young quarterbacks, and they would always come to me instead of the coach because the coach was an idiot. If I'm being honest, the quarterback's coach was the offensive coordinator's son, and he was an idiot. Maybe he's better now. I don't know, but he was an idiot. And he couldn't coach them. He would say things like they didn't understand it, so then come to me and I'd coach them up. Well, then he found out they were coming to me, and I was helping them out. I was helping the kid that took my job out. And the quarterback's coach got pissed off and went to his dad, and they said, you're not allowed to talk to them anymore. Like, that's how bad it was. But my dad was like, okay, that's on him. How you respond to it reflects upon you.
Right.
And that's a lesson I would give every single player that's not showing up, not ready to play, and blaming the coaches. No. You can't control what they do and don't teach you. You can control how hard you play. You can control what your attitude is like. You can control whether you're going to let how he's treating you drag you down. Now, that's easy to say as a 44-year-old. Okay, I'm getting so old I don't even remember how old I am anymore. It's
you don't
easy
look
for
a
me
day
to say,
over 30. You don't look a day over 30.
That.
Yeah.
If I do this, you're kind of correct. But my point is, I've lived it. I've experienced it. I'm a grown man now. It's a lot harder to actually be that way when you're 18, 19, or 20 and you're going through it. So this isn't a suck it up, kid, you're fine. And it's easy to do. It's hard to do when all these things are happening to you. But at the end of the day, that's your task. You're a student athlete at Notre Dame. That's what's expected of you, right? It's not about Coach Reese. It's not about Coach Stuckey or Coach McCullough or Coach Freeman or what Brian Driscoll writes about you in the media. None of that controls the things that you control, right? Control your own controllables, right? I think, Ryan, you've said that before, right? Like, focus on the things that you can control. And that's what these kids can do. What Chancey Stuckey does or doesn't teach a receiver should not impact whether or not they play hard or are focused or are fired up or want to be out there. That's on you. Now, the environment can be such that it makes it harder to do that. I will admit that. And I think that's what a lot of kids are going through right now. At the end of the day, when you put on that gold helmet, Your attitude and your effort is reflective upon you, right? Now, we'll hold the coaches accountable, no question. And we do that a lot. But at the end of the day, I'm not – and, Sean, I think the environment has been set up to where I'm going to hold the coaches ultimately accountable for it. But the players also have to have an accountability thing. Like what we saw from Isaiah Foskey on Saturday against Stanford, I got questions about the job Al Washington's doing, but that's on Isaiah Foskey.
Yep.
Right? Like, dude, you know better than that. You know, that's on you, dude.
Yeah.
So –
we talked about that yesterday, man, because there's
you
a lot
Sean
of blame.
did?
Yeah, we talked about the coaching stuff yesterday a little bit, but I actually used Isaiah Foskey as an example, not to harp on him too much, but Isaiah didn't come to play, man. Like he didn't come to play on Saturday. Let's call it what it is. That's not on the coach necessarily. That's on Isaiah for that situation, right? Like he's been a player. What's he in his 4th year at Notre Dame and his 2nd year as a starter, full-time starter, 3 years of substantial playing time. Like that's a player issue at that point. But to your point, Brian, yes, at the core, it's about the coach's preparation. But there are some instances where a player did not get himself ready, right? He didn't psych himself up. He didn't prepare to his best ability. So we need to separate those two things because it's not always just one side. But I think that every situation is a little different. And that's why we need to evaluate them as such.
Next question here. There's a question out here, Ryan, that's going to be really fun to answer. Antoine Johnson says, Brian, most teams in college football have self-evaluators on staff. Does Notre Dame have one? Does Notre Dame self-scout? It's hard for me to accept that they actually self-scout right now because nothing has changed. Like literally, name me one thing that's really changed other than just the line being coached, getting better and better every week. Name me one thing that in any structural way whatsoever has changed since the first game of the year, other than Benjamin Morrison starting now over Clarence Lewis. Name me one thing that's changed. No players have been benched. No schematic changes have happened. No philosophical changes have happened. The linebackers keep doing the same crap over and over and over again, and that tells me that Al Golden just keeps thinking they're the problem and just keeps – not playing, not teaching them up, not looking in the mirror and saying, hey, maybe I'm part of the problem. My entire unit sucks. My entire unit's not playing well. My entire unit has regressed from a year ago. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm the problem. Just saying. So I don't think Marcus Freeman's telling them that. And if he is, they're not listening to him. Which is a much bigger problem, but I don't know if that's happening. But I can only assume that it's not being said. I can only assume that they're not going in there and butts aren't being chewed out and people aren't being put on notice and all that kind of stuff, which needs to happen when you're sucking as bad as Notre Dame has been sucking. 3-3 is inexcusable. Inexcusable right now. Inexcusable. Yeah. And so like 4-2 I could have lived with because before the year there was a lot of people that thought they were going to lose to Ohio State and BYU. There's a lot of people that thought that. There were some people that thought they might lose to North Carolina instead of BYU, but there was a lot of people that thought this team would be 4-2 at this point in time of the year, which is what makes the Stanford game so bad. But you would have been 4-2 and have lost to Marshall. But now you're 3-3 with losses to Marshall and Stanford. No, that's coaching. That's 100% coaching. And because here's the thing, Antoine, even if they are self-scouting, it comes down to what's in your mind. What's your soul as a coach. If your soul of a coach is always to look outwardly for why things aren't working, then self-scouting does nothing for you. Nothing for you.
You have to want to make a fix.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. If you're someone who believes, hey, look, it's not getting done because of, and I'm ultimately responsible, then you're going to be more open to self-scouting. Now, you also can't be someone who just every time something goes wrong, you just completely change your offense or defense. You can't be that either. There has to be a healthy blend of, okay, can we do something different here? And they're just not. All right. Jim Halloran asks, Brian and Ryan, in your opinions, why haven't the fundamental issues been fixed on both sides of the ball? So tired of the evaluate, excuse, fix the problem. I think at some positions they have. I think the offensive line is playing much better now than they did in the opener.
100%.
Much better.
Yep.
I think receiver play has gotten slightly better from the beginning of the year, not a ton. But yeah, I mean, Jim, and then the defensive line started making strides in a couple games against bad offensive lines, and then they came out on Saturday and didn't really play that well against an offensive line that was missing 2 starters, and a third guy had moved positions. You know, like I mean, yeah, and those are issues not getting addressed.
We talked about it earlier too, Brian. I think that there is not a trust in responsibilities for a lot of players at various positions. And when that happens, I think that your position becomes a little chaotic, right? Like your mind's going a little too fast. You're thinking about a little too much. And when you're thinking too much, that's when you lose your technique, right? Like that's the whole thing with like pre-snap movement for like linebackers for a second, right? Like I'm trying to mess with your mind so that you're not true to your technique. And I think that that's what's happening as well. Is I think guys aren't as true to their technique because they're a little frazzled and they're a little confused on what the responsibility is at times. You know, when players think too much, that's when you sacrifice the technique. And I think that's what's happening sometimes to some players.
I want to respond to this too real quick from Beefeater. Brian and Ryan, wait a minute. If self-evaluation and change is part of what makes a coach great, are you saying BK is a great coach for the 2017 changes he made? No, for 2 reasons. Number one is he didn't make those changes until he had no choice. and that's not what good coaches do. Urban Meyer goes through 2 seasons of Everett Withers. They win 24 straight games, get embarrassed in the Big Ten title game by Michigan State, and get embarrassed by Clemson. And instead of waiting till it got worse, he made the change then. And the next year they went out and won a title. Nick Saban brings in coaches and they don't do a good job, and he recognizes it before it's too late, and they collapse and have a 4-8 season. So no, number one. Number two, I've said this before, Brian Kelly did not make those changes because that's what he wanted to do. Those were thrust upon him. Brian Kelly was trying to leave after 2016. So while his agent's trying to get him another job, Jack Swarbrick and the people that work under him were out there the ones. I've been told this by people involved in the process. They were the ones that did most of the legwork to get Chip Long, Mike Elko here. And Matt Bayless is only here because Bob Diaco called Brian Kelly after he got fired from UConn and said, hey, you got to bring this Matt. They're going to hire a guy from USC. So no, he does not get credit for that. He does not get credit for that. And maybe Jack Swarbrick thought, hey, I did a good job getting coordinators last time, so I'm going to force Tommy Rees on it. But in this instance, it was not a good idea. Because if anything, I believe, and I could be wrong, that if Marcus Freeman was allowed to make his own hire at offensive coordinator, I believe, and I've said this before, I think he still would have kept Tommy Rees. But the dynamic would be different.
Right.
The dynamic would be, I chose you. It's kind of like, the old, the joke, my dad used to say to me, he would say it jokingly, he goes, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Right. I mean, it was a joke, right? And it was from a comedy skit. But the point is, if I'm the guy that brought you here, I can be the guy that makes sure you're not here anymore. You're going to do it my way. Right. Mm-hmm. And when I'm not the reason you're here. Somebody above me, my boss is the reason you're here. And then it gets reported. And who do you think told people that? Do you think Marcus Freeman was telling sources that reported Tommy Rees has complete autonomy on offense? Do you think that was Marcus Freeman saying that? No, that was coming from the other side. And once that gets out, it's like, okay, well, I have no authority here. And that's the scary thing.
It's like an arranged marriage. It's not organic, right? Like that's the big thing. It's not organic.
Yeah. That's good. Some arranged marriages work.
Feels disjointed. 100%.
Some work,
100%.
some don't. And it worked last time, didn't work this time. Brian NY with Super Chat. Thank you, Brian. Consequences for the estimated fumbles, more digs maybe. I mean, yeah, there needs to be consequences, but I also don't believe you just bench a guy because of that, especially a guy that plays well. You make sure you coach him up, and we're not Pop Warner. You coach him up, you get him to fix it, and make sure he doesn't do it again. And now this is 2 big fumbles by him. Right. So, you have to be cognizant of that, but just play more digs. I think we already talked about what it should be. Get Chris Tyree involved doing the things he's comfortable with, have Logan Diggs do the things he's comfortable with, and Estimate do the things he's comfortable with. And there's going to be carryover with all 3 of them.
Yep.
Just use them better and then teach him how. I mean, because both times it's because he's not putting it. Look, when you're in traffic, you put the ball here. Every running back I've ever coached did that. I've never had a running back or a receiver lose a ball like that. Why? Because you work on it in practice. When you're moving around, you do this. And I know that it's being taught because we haven't seen that happen to Logan Diggs. We haven't seen that happen to Chris Tyree. So Audrick's just got to really get that. And now if he continues to just not make the changes, then you got to take him out. All right. You can't put a guy in there that won't take the steps to not turn the ball over anymore in clutch situations. But I'm not ready to just move on from him yet. I'm not ready there. If it happens again, third strike, okay, but I'm not ready to go there. Brian and Ryan, do you think players knowing Marcus Freeman tells Tommy to rethink what he is doing and force him to change could prevent players from wanting to transfer with better hopes for next year? Yes. I think if Marcus Freeman wants to salvage this season culturally and from respect from his players, it needs to be very obvious that he has gone into his coordinators and let them know this isn't okay and stop blaming the players. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now blaming the players happens one of two ways. One is it's verbalized either publicly or privately. Or two is because you don't change anything. And when you don't change anything, it tells me that you don't think you're the problem. That's blaming the players. It's not the same way as me just saying it's the players' fault, but it's still the same thing. When you keep calling the same thing over and over again and keep getting pissed when your players don't execute it, that's because you think they're the problem. And they're not. You are.
And I mean, Brian, why were we so excited leading up to the season? It's the fact of like Marcus Freeman was instilling a lot of belief in players, right? Like you didn't just hear like, oh, Marcus Freeman's a real cool guy and he's a great coach. Like you heard those things, but at the end of it, it's also we think that Marcus Freeman's going to take Notre Dame back. He's going to win national championships. Like that's the expectation, right? And if you come off of this disappointing season and you make no changes. Right. What was your goal? Your goal is to stay the same, right? Because you're not going to change you're not going to succeed if you don't change anything, right? There has to be a change, right. And that doesn't necessarily mean changing coaches, but there has to be a changing in philosophy. There's got to be a changing in the way you do things. There has to be something. Right. Otherwise, you're going to stay the same, and the same is not good enough as of right now.
I actually think it needs to happen sooner. I worry that by the time he steps in and makes those changes, it's going to be too late. And he'll have lost certain players. I mean, like that's really all I've done the last few days is just field those phone calls. I mean, it's been insane. And it's not about playing time. It's much deeper than that. And this has been going on for a month now, right? It's worse now that they're losing again. But it was going on during the winning streak as well. It's a right way and a wrong way to treat people. And the way that Marcus Freeman treated people as a coach is not the same way some of his coaches are treating people now. And that's a problem. That's a problem. C. Sievers asks, is there any truth to Tommy Rees turning down having an analyst? I've seen that reported. I have no knowledge of that, which is why we haven't spoken on it. Yeah. Because I keep getting asked it and I just want to say it like I've never heard that. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying I don't know. And I can't speak on something that I have no knowledge of. I can't deny it. And I can't confirm it either way because I've heard nothing about it either way. I haven't heard somebody say, no, that's not true. It didn't happen. And I haven't somebody say, yeah, it happened. I've heard nothing about that. So I can't comment on that. That's why we've avoided that subject. That's why we don't talk about it on our shows. We don't talk about it on the message board. And the reason I'm only addressing it now is because A, you asked it, and B, hopefully people will stop asking me about it. Simply because maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. And the one thing I will never do here, or any of the people that work for me will ever be allowed to do, if they want to keep working here, is talk about things that or try to confirm things or say things that just aren't true, or they don't really know and they're just taking what somebody else is reporting and then passing it off as their own. We don't do that here. Other people may do that. Other people do that. We don't. And so I have no knowledge of this and I can't comment on it. And I think Ryan and I have talked about it. He has not heard that either. So that's why we haven't addressed that subject. Yeah. Nor are we even saying names.
Someone asked about it yesterday too, and we said the same exact thing, that we haven't heard it. We don't have any knowledge of it. So at the moment,
not denying it, not confirming it, because we know nothing about it either
just
way.
Don't know. Yeah.
Ray Holcraft says, is the conversation that much different had Notre Dame won 17-16? That is a garbage win. I've had people say this. If Notre Dame would have won, we would have a different conversation. And I will say this, whether you like our show or don't like our show, the one thing that you always know is we do not get driven by results only. We have been very critical of Notre Dame after wins because, again, we're looking at how you play, and is that level of play going to be good enough to beat the teams you need to beat that matter?
Did anybody come to our post-game show against Cal and think that we were like, oh, sunshine and rainbows? Like, absolutely
or even
not,
BYU, even the BYU game. I mean, I got somebody ripped me on the board, and it's like, it was I should ripped is a little strong, but it was critical of me because I didn't make Drew Pine the player of the game. And then my response, I said, well, he missed this, he missed this, he missed this, and the guy went off. Like, well, the stuff that I was critical of Drew against BYU is stuff that was there and was even a bigger problem against Stanford, because you can't always get away with that stuff.
Right.
And I mean, I've always done that. I remember in 2009 when Notre Dame was playing Nevada, and they just rolled Nevada. It's like 31-0 or 35-0 or something like that. And after the game, I'm like, man, this is bad. It's 35-0. This is really bad, because Nevada dropped like 9 passes, and there was guys open that Colin Kaepernick didn't see them. And Nevada just missed a ton of opportunities to score a lot of points in that game. And I was like, this defense is not as good as those numbers said. I said the same thing early in 2014 when they were shutting out teams. I said, look, teams are going to get the book on this, and they're going to figure some stuff out. And then we saw what happened. And then what happened the next week after Colin Kaepernick gets shut out and they beat Nevada 35-0, and people are ripping me because, you're so critical. You're just never happy. They went out, they made Tate Forcier look like a Heisman Trophy candidate the next week.
Oh man.
And then the rest is history from there. So I will always try to be honest. And sometimes you can lose and you say, boy, there's a lot of good stuff to take out of that game. Now, some stuff that's got to get fixed because you lost, but there's a lot of good stuff to take out of that game, which we did in the Ohio State game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, it wouldn't change for me, Ray. The record would be better, and I think there'd be a different sort of tone in a lot of the stuff. It's about, hey, look, they got the win, but they got to fix this stuff. Whereas now it's like, I think the losses make it even your backs are up against the wall even more.
Right.
Matt Calthin, someone on the board said that Freeman had a Monday morning meeting with Jack. Is that true? I have no idea. I would imagine Jack and Marcus meet relatively frequently. I mean, that's kind of what a head coach does with his assistant. So, and I would imagine after a loss like this, I would imagine Jack did want to talk to Marcus. It's not an abnormal thing. I don't know if that's true or not. Again, I don't speak on things that I don't have knowledge of, but I can assure you that that's not an abnormal thing, especially after a loss like that. And I hope they did meet. And I hope Marcus is going to – and I hope that Marcus believes what we believe and expresses that to Jack. I don't know if he will or won't, though. Here's the question I wanted to get to, Ryan, that I thought was really fascinating. Brian and Ryan, speaking of the talent, how many points per game would Notre Dame average if Day, Riley, Heupel, Sark, et cetera, was running the offense? So let's say that those coaches – and let's not do the whole, well, if they were here for this amount of time, this would be the – with the players that they have now, what would things look like, in your opinion? And so to me, I mean, just looking at this as objectively as possible, let's just say that those coaches were good enough to bring an extra touchdown against Ohio State, an extra touchdown against North Carolina, and then an extra touchdown against BYU. That's it. So the games that you won, all they did was give you an extra touchdown, which is just Audric Estime not fumbling in the end zone, right? Yep. Not getting stopped on 4th down, right? Simple stuff that actually happened. Let's just say that happens. And then let's say they do to Marshall what they should have done to Marshall, which is what? Say at least, 38 points? At least? At least,
yeah. At least.
Okay, so let's 38 points. Cal, he scored 24. Let's just say it's a touchdown better with those coaches.
31. Yeah.
Right? And then let's go to the Stanford game. Let's just say all they would have done against Stanford is what every other team did against Stanford basically this year. Every other FBS team would have done against them this year. And Stanford was giving up 38.5 points per game against non-Colgates. So let's just say they would have put up what everybody else put up. Right? So let's do the math that way. And so it is – I love calculators on the computer. So that is 35.2 points per game. I think that's very reasonable. And that's still less than what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think they should be – with the teams that they've played so far, they should be creeping up closer to 40 points a game. But the Ohio State game at the beginning, you only played 6 games. That'll drag it down a tad. But name me a team that's really good on defense or has the talent that Notre Dame has on defense in the 5 game since.
I know. I know, man.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of those hypotheticals where you're thinking, you're just like, what could have been? But yes. Yep.
Thomas Walsh said, field what phone calls, Brian? I've been getting a lot of phone calls from people that are very frustrated and upset the last week. And it's been really going on for the last month. But y'all, listen, Jacob Lacey, I don't agree with what Jacob did. And I've said this. I love Jacob. He's really a good kid. And I have a lot of respect for his family. They're good people. I've known them for a long time. I don't believe in it's ever right to transfer in the middle of the season when you're playing because you're unhappy with your playing time. Yeah. I can sympathize with your frustration, but I don't believe in that. I mean, so he's got to do his best for him. No. Once the season starts, unless there's some sort of abuse happening, I don't believe in that. I don't, right? But my point is that didn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like when those things happen, there's always more to it. There's always more to it than that. And so he's not the only one. He's just the only one that made the decision to leave now.
Yeah.
He's the only one that really had the leverage to make the decision to leave now. And I can just assure you there's a lot of frustrated people and it's not just about playing time. It's about the culture and how they're being treated. And a lot of it has to do with the offensive side of the ball, even some defensive people. So it's not good, man. It's not good, Thomas. So that's what I was referring to. All right. Sean Michael with Super Chat. Thank you, Sean. He says, Brian, was great to meet and chat with you on Saturday. Likewise. Thank you for clearing up my question about the last bits of the BK era. That show was great, and energy around it was awesome. Awesome for IB and Notre Dame. Yeah, that was the Jeremiah Love thing. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And I hope we're able to do that again. I have a feeling we're not going to be able to ever do that again, but hopefully we'll be able to do that again and have some fun with it. Beefeater asked Brian and Ryan, no, actually we already answered that one. So sorry, I forgot to unstar that one at the end. So Ryan, I think that is going to be it for the questions. I don't think I saw anything else on there that so here's one. KL, what does our offense look like against our defense in practice? I'm told they rarely go against each other. It's all scout team stuff. So they don't really. Anyway. All right. So, Ryan, that is going to do it for today's show. This was a fun show. Not always a happy show, but a fun show. I enjoyed it. A lot of good stuff in it, Ryan. Thank you for doing it with me. Thank you all for being with us today. Great crowd today. Great questions. We appreciate you all very much. Tonight, 6 o'clock, Sean Stiers and Jesse Stiers will be back for another edition of the IB Nation Sports Talk Show. Tomorrow, I'll be back at 1. I'm not quite sure who's going to be joining me. Sean Davis and I will have a show together this week. We don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or Thursday. Just has to depend. We have to figure out some other things. I got to talk with Ryan about kind of how things are going to go as well. So we'll definitely be back. And then, of course, we'll have another IB Nation Sports Talk show tomorrow and Thursday as well. By the time we get to Thursday, Friday, we'll start somewhat kind of getting into our UNLV prep. And again, it's not a disrespect to UNLV. It's just there's bigger issues afloat right now than UNLV. And so we will definitely do that. But hit that like button, everybody. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review and sign up for the CFB Nation channel as well. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakingdown.com. We still got great merch on there. Obviously, we're going to have some new things here soon as well. We've got our Built Bar action, all that kind of good stuff. So definitely make sure you check all of that out. And of course, come back and join us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.